Wednesday, it sounded like it was very frosty. Boris Johnson was reportedly trying to tell Ursula von der Leyen she should sideline Barnier simply because he's French. I hear that at the Commission that really did not go down well. They are two very different people, despite their very similar upbringing, as you say. She's a quite serious person. Boris Johnson is, more jovial, I think. A little
Who's
less
got the most
serious.
children? She's got 7.
She has 7, yes. Boris Johnson, we don't know, do we?
Dave, listen, I've got to leave it because Tom's waiting. Tom Swarbrick's waiting for me. Brussels correspondent for France 24. Thank you very much indeed. Sorry to rush you with that. 9:59. Majid is coming up at 1 here on LBC. You won't want to miss that. And live from Westminster right now, Tom. Morning.
Andrew, thank you to you. Morning all. Welcome to the show. At 10 o'clock...
I've got to tell you that from where I stand now, it's looking, very, very likely that we'll have to go for a solution that I think would be wonderful for the UK.
Deadline day. The Prime Minister set to decide whether or not to call EU trade talks off as supermarkets told to stockpile ahead of no deal.
Conditions have to be fair. They have to be fair for our workers and for our companies. This fine balance has not been achieved so far.
The next 24 hours could herald an unprecedented change in the UK's economic and trading relationship with the world. Ahead of any Australian-style deal, we have not one but 2 former Australian Prime Ministers and ex-Irish Taoiseach, the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab also joins me live. Swarbrick on Sunday, after the news at 10.
On your radio, on Global Player, and...
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 10 o'clock, Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab says there needs to be political willing to secure a post-Brexit trade deal with the European Union as the hours count down to the latest self-imposed deadline. Boris Johnson will again speak with the President of the European Commission, reportedly this lunchtime, after they set the revised marker days ago. It says UK government sources continue to warn the deal on offer is still unacceptable, with a no deal the most likely outcome. Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage has told the Prime Minister needs to now hold his nerve.
If he was to agree to Brussels terms, we would find ourselves stuck to EU law on every single aspect of our commercial life, and it wouldn't matter how we voted in general elections or what Parliament had to say. We would have to adhere to EU rules without having any say. Now, I think the vast majority of people, certainly Brexiteers, but many Remainers too, would think that's unacceptable.
But Dominic Grieve, a former Conservative MP and Attorney General who left the party last year after he backed a bill to try to stop a no-deal Brexit, has told LBC both sides are looking out for their own interests.
I don't think there's a good guy, bad guy aspect to this. There is a certain inevitability about it. After all, I was warning a year ago that I thought we would end up here at a time when Boris Johnson was bouncing up and down, saying that it was going to be the easiest deal in history.
In other headlines this hour, NHS providers claim there will be a third wave of infections when coronavirus restrictions are eased for 5 days over Christmas. In response, the government says ministers will not hesitate to take necessary actions to protect local communities, adding decisions are based on the latest available data and advice from public health experts. Separately, a massive logistical operation is underway in the United States to get the country's first coronavirus vaccine to nearly 150 locations. It follows the US government giving the final go-ahead to the Pfizer-BioNTech jab, the same one being administered in the United Kingdom. Reports say the Metropolitan Police have dropped their investigation into a Conservative MP accused of sexual assault. The unidentified politician has always denied the allegations after being arrested and questioned in the summer. More than 100 people have been arrested in Paris during protests against a new security law. The proposed legislation in France would make it more difficult for people to film police, which critics fear could harm media freedom. Around 45 countries who took part in yesterday's online UN summit on climate action appear to have put forward new plans to speed up goals to reduce greenhouse gases. The event marked the 5th anniversary of the International Paris Agreement, committing countries to limiting temperature rises.
LBC weather.
With Halls, get winter ready.
Those wet and windy conditions in the west spreading eastwards through the day, reaching the far north and the east by the afternoon. Some heavy rain at times, mainly over western hills, brighter but showery conditions following into the west, a high of 12 degrees. From Global's newsroom, I'm Philip Chrysikos.
is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster.
Just gone 10. Hello, good morning, and welcome to the show. You are listening to and watching Swarbrick on Sunday live here on LBC. I'm Tom Swarbrick. Hope we find you very well this Sunday morning. Coming up, there is only one story in town, I'm afraid. The enormous and unprecedented change in the UK's economic and trading relationship with the world, which will be undergone should talks with the EU be halted today. The papers this morning reporting the chances of no deal at 80%, with supermarkets told to stockpile and millions in financial support for farmers being readied. The world is watching. And on the show this morning, former Australian Prime Ministers Kevin Rudd and Tony Abbott on Britain's supposed Australia-style deal with the EU. Former Irish Taoiseach Bertie Ahern will join us later as well as the former Chancellor Ken Clarke. A potentially historic day awaits. Don't go anywhere.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Very good morning to you, and if that wasn't enough, there's a pandemic on as well. We'll have the details a little bit later. You know where we are today. Today is deadline day. Boris Johnson had dinner with Ursula von der Leyen in the week, a dinner which, according to a source who was there, actually went worse than was reported last week. The stage was then set for a decision today about the future of those trade talks, with significant differences still existing. Talks will continue for a few more hours. But the papers are full of reports that the government have informed supermarkets and businesses that it is to be no deal, hence the stockpiling of certain foods that are going to have tariffs applied to their movements in just a few weeks. There are reports in the papers that Tesco's, for example, have resurrected a number of warehouses to stock pasta and tinned tomatoes, a kind of scaled-up student kitchen. Is this the right outcome for Britain? Nothing surely could be more disruptive than a pandemic, and we've lived through that. So is the disruption of no deal actually worth it? And once we've reached the apparent sunlit uplands, as Boris Johnson calls them, then what? What do you want the government to do with the freedoms it says it's going to have? 0345 6060 973. We'll be in Europe in just a moment. First, LBC's political editor, Theo Ursula, joins me live. Very good morning to you, Theo. Just explain what we might be seeing later on today.
Very good morning, Tom. Well, for starters, we're going to probably see a phone call between Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, and Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, at around lunchtime today. And then after that, we should get some stock take as to where we are with these negotiations, an idea about whether a deal can be reached by this evening. And of course, that was the deadline that came out last week following that dinner between Boris Johnson and Ursula von der Leyen in Brussels. But I have to say, mood music right now, Tom, it's not looking likely that a deal is going to be done. We know about the supermarkets stockpiling of goods. It was a story I touched on on LBC earlier in the week when Dominic Raab came out and blamed queues at the ports on COVID. And actually, when I was speaking to the hauliers, they were saying that the queues were down to the fact that there was an influx of goods into the country ahead of the tariffs. And of course, a lot of that has to do with stockpiling. And then we know already about the Royal Navy potentially being deployed as early as tomorrow to ensure that EU fishermen do not enter UK territorial waters. And of course, that would come at the event of a no-deal Brexit. It is not looking as if there is going to be a deal at the moment. All the rhetoric, all the talk has been, Tom, about preparing for those Australian style rules, those Aussie arrangements. And of course, you've got the key players with Kevin Rudd and Tony Abbott on your programme later. It'll be very interesting to hear what they've got to say about whether it works for Australia or not.
Theo, thank you. Stick around for us. LBC's political editor, Theo Ursula, will be bringing every cough, kick and splutter of those negotiations as they go on this morning. Let's get out to the European Union, though. Danuta Huebner is Polish MEP who sits on the Brexit steering group of the European Parliament and chair of the European Parliament's Constitutional Affairs Committee. Thank you very much for your time this morning. I wonder if you think that the mood music is all pointing towards no deal and whether that is the likeliest outcome now.
Well, thank you, Tom, for the invitation. As you know, on the continent, we always say that as long as people sit around the table and as long as there is dialogue, there is always hope. So I also hope that these ongoing negotiations will reach sufficient agreement at the more detailed level that would allow us to have a deal. But it's true that the name of the game still today is uncertainty, which is nothing new because we had it throughout the whole period. But now it's at two levels. First, that you mentioned in your introductory statements, people were mentioning it, that there is an uncertainty about deal or no deal at this level. And here I think the no deal shouldn't be an option for anybody, including the Prime Minister of UK. Just adding a no deal, 100% disruption to the COVID is just not responsible. But there is also uncertainty if we have a deal, whether we will be able to get it enter into effect on the 1st of January. And that's also a big challenge. But let me also say that what I'm worrying additionally, which nobody's mentioning, is that now we are in this transition where UK is out of the European Union, still in the single market, still in the custom union. And the end of transition will mean that you are out of both of those frameworks. And that means that the transition, which was seen as by some people as already being outside the union, it's not really will happen only the next year, and the difference will be enormous. So let's try to make a deal an option that is rational and will serve the people better. Well,
let me just ask you about the political will to succeed when it comes to any trading deal. And you've suggested that it would be the fault of the UK Prime Minister, or that he shouldn't be countenancing a no deal. I put it to you that the European Union's demands of saying, well, in order to get access to preferential access to the market, you need to sign up to in perpetuity any changes to EU rules, and the UK would have to respond to them, is not an outcome that any other country that has a trading deal with the EU has, and is not taking full knowledge of and cognizance of the UK's newfound independence.
Well, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding at the level of public information on this issue, because it's crucial to understand that we have in the single market, which is now 400, when UK goes 450 million people, we have certain rules because we do not have internal borders for goods, for services, for people. Mm-hmm. So we have to respect the same rules. And
I understand that, but there are obviously rules.
But a new partner that, like UK, which is just around the corner, which is a huge market for, in general terms, as economy, but also for whom the internal market of the EU is a huge client, is a huge market that we open. So we have to see that it's not like Canada, or it's not like any other small country, but it's about UK. So when you enter the single market, you have to respect the rules. The challenge is that if you don't, you don't have to respond, but you cannot enter
Ms.
the
Ebner,
market.
Are you irritated, not just by the UK's position, which clearly you are, but also perhaps by, and the Irish Taoiseach has suggested it this morning, that it would be a failure of statecraft, presumably on both sides, if a deal were not reached?
Well, I think it has never been the option for the European Union. We understood it can happen by accident, by a political decision on the UK side, but it has never been our option. But we have to protect this market because we want to have the British goods in our market, and they have to respect the rules. I'm sorry, but that's just the basic criterion for entering the market without borders. So I'm sure that UK understands, negotiators understand it perfectly, because they have been for more than 45 years with us.
And we've been at these negotiations for a long time. Danuta, thank you very much indeed. Danuta Huebner, who is a Polish MEP who sits on the Brexit steering group of the European Parliament, chair of the European Parliament's Constitutional Affairs Committee. Listening to that is Daniel Kaczynski, Conservative MP for Shrewsbury and Atcham. Thank you very much for your time on the programme this morning, sir. I wonder, just picking up from what Ms. Huebner said there, the UK just has to understand the rules of engagement here, and we're apparently choosing not to.
Well, I think the Polish representative has given a very one-sided perspective of the whole situation. We clearly cannot sign up to being ongoing rule takers from the European Union. Our rules and regulations are aligned at the moment completely after 48 years of membership of this organization. But of course, if we were to agree to their terms, we would become a vassal state, a state which takes instructions from a foreign entity.
We would have access to a market. it's in our economic interests to have access to. And in fact, Ursula von der Leyen has been very clear this week in saying that any arrangement would not be to say that we would require the UK to follow us every time we decide to raise our level of ambition. We would simply adapt the conditions of access to the market based on decisions of the UK. So the UK is perfectly free to take its own decisions, even with a trade deal. It would just impact the access that we'd have.
And then we would be brought back to this imbroglio over and over again every time that the United Kingdom wants to diverge in any way from the rules and regulations of the European Union. It's completely unacceptable. But let me just say this to you. We have a trade deficit with the European Union of over £90 billion a year. So they export far more to us than we export to them. And every single year over the last 15 years, the total number of British exports going abroad to the European Union as a percentage of global exports has been shrinking because that market is stagnating.
Reports there, Mr. Kaczynski, of supermarkets stockpiling, of naval boats getting ready to go in to watch French trawlers in the Channel. That doesn't worry you?
Well, I know the media love to put forward the worst possible scenarios.
The media is looking at the changes that may well come. It's not us that's putting forward the scenario. It's the government that is making the decisions that is leading to the fact that there are queues at Calais, that there are problems. In fact, the government itself has commissioned its own ability to get medicines and food across the border should there be a problem. That's not the media.
Well, the United Kingdom government is doing everything possible, going right down to the wire to make sure that there is a deal. But as I say to you, and in the meantime, we have signed up over 58 trade agreements with key international trading partners. Isn't it fascinating how the rest of the world is queuing up to sign bilateral free trade agreements with the United Kingdom, wanting to...
They are continuity arrangements, though.
Continuity arrangements which are equitable with the ones.
So we're signing up to things we already had.
Yes, but some of them are actually better than the agreements that we had through the European Union, such as the deal with Japan, which independent analysts have said because the two interlocutors have sat round the table together and put the Japanese and the British perspectives to the fore, so the trade deal is more tailor-made and specific to the bilateral interests of the United Kingdom and Japan.
Well, clearly we'll be following the rules that are indicative in that trade deal. Daniel Kaczynski, very good to talk to you. Conservative MP for Shrewsbury and Atcham, thank you for your time. 0345 6060 973. Did anybody vote for this particular outcome? Is anybody at this stage now thinking, even if you voted Remain, for God's sake, we just need a decision. Let's make a decision and we'll deal with it. 0345 6060 973. Lots of talk about this Australia-style deal with the EU, the trading on WTO terms. In a few moments' time, I'll be joined by a former Australian Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, to give us his view on whether an Australian-style deal would benefit Britain. Swarbrick on Sunday, LBC 1017.
This is LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Very good morning to you. 20 past 10 is the time. You're watching Swarbrick on Sunday here on LBC, where it is deadline day. This is the moment at which talks are going to be decided about whether or not they can continue, following the discussion between Ursula von der Leyen and Boris Johnson earlier on this week. And all the indications are that we are going to have to move to a WTO trading relationship with the European Union, this so-called Australia-style deal. As Lazarus says here on 84850, no deal Brexit, or as the government prefers to call it, Australia deal, will be a disaster for our economy. And this is not fear-mongering. The shock cost of Brexit to the UK economy hit me the day after the referendum in 2016 to do with the fluctuations in the pound. Well, whether it's an Australian-style deal in terms of a trading relationship or an Australian-style points-based immigration system, we seem to be imitating Australia in all sorts of different ways, not least with the frequency of our prime ministers. Let's turn to a former Australian Prime Minister. Kevin Rudd joins us, who served as PM from December 2007 to June 2010, and then again from June to September 2013. He is also president of the Asia Society. Very good to have you on the programme this morning, Prime Minister Rudd. When it comes to an Australia-style deal, then, tell us the terms on which Australia trades with the EU and how it benefits Australia.
Well, the bottom line, we, like every other country which is not a member of the European Union or which doesn't have a bilateral free trade agreement with the European Union, we simply trade on, let's call it, open World Trade Organization lines. That is, there are no particular preferences. We have one or two smaller agreements with the European Union covering aspects of the wine trade, for example, but that's about it. And it's for those reasons, that is, the disadvantages of the current, let's call it WTO trading relationship we have with Brussels, that Australia for the last several years has been trying to negotiate its own free trade agreement with Brussels. That process is underway, and that's because there are impediments to our trading interests under the existing arrangement.
Is the EU, in those discussions, is the EU asking Australia to sign up to rules that could change and asking Australia to follow those rules regardless of whether they have a say over it in perpetuity?
Look, these negotiations are very much still underway. The final negotiating positions of Brussels and, for that matter, Canberra is not in the public domain yet. But with all such negotiations, you will understand that the Europeans, being the larger economy, as they've done recently in their negotiations with Canada, will have a number of bottom lines. These will be to do with labour standards, environmental standards, and the sorts of things, climate standards, the sorts of things that you would normally associate with.
Presumably, you couldn't, Mr. Rudd, as if you were the Prime Minister now, sign Australia up to take rules from another organisation based on access to its market.
No, I've seen some of the debate in the United Kingdom, for example, whereby it's proposed, as I understand it, that for any agreement with Brussels, ministers of the Crown in the United Kingdom have the opportunity to unilaterally opt out of certain provisions in the future. That's not how international trade law works, and certainly not how bilateral free trade agreements work. All I would say in general terms, without wishing to dig myself into the ditches of domestic British politics, is we in Australia do not find our current trading relationship with Brussels satisfactory. That's why both sides of Australian politics, myself from the Labor Party and the Conservatives here, have sought to negotiate a new, much more liberal bilateral free trade agreement with Brussels, which would be better for Australian exporters, particularly in agriculture, but beyond agriculture, in services as well.
So is it a case of the UK needing to be careful what it wishes for here?
Well, look, you've got your own debate running there. My own personal position as a friend of the United Kingdom for a long period of time, I'm often there. We spend a fair bit of time in the UK, many friends in British politics on both sides of British politics. We want Britain to succeed. That's the Australian view of the United Kingdom. And my long-standing view is that Brexit is madness, period, from a British perspective. Europe is much stronger by having Britain in it, and Britain is much stronger for being in Europe. But now that you've decided to have a divorce, the terms of this divorce, I firmly believe would be best executed on the basis of a negotiated deal. An untidy divorce is bad for Britain, bad for Europe, and bad for the West.
Do you think Britain's place in the world is diminished by Brexit, whatever type of Brexit we get?
My honest analytical view is that Britain, in the eyes of the United States, where I have run a think tank for the last 5 years, the Asia Society Policy Institute, which focuses primarily on US-Asia, US-China relations, but we're mindful of the transatlantic relationship. My view is that the view from Washington, both sides of the aisle, mainstream Republicans and Democrats, is that Britain is a much more important country in the world by virtue of having been in Europe. And the logic of that covers so many other dimensions of the relationship, not just in economic, trade, investment and technology terms, but in foreign policy and national security terms as well. And I think it's a retrograde step period. Given you've taken it, however, I am strongly of the view that given that the divorce is underway, make it as tidy as possible so that the relationship with Brussels can be as seamless as possible for the future. There's 450 million people in Europe. There's 50 or 60 million of you in the UK. The mathematics tend to speak for itself.
Well, one of the things the British government is very keen to do once it is outside the customs union is to negotiate trading arrangements with other countries around the world. And we've seen some of those continuity arrangements agreed upon via the Trade Secretary. And one country that is looked at in particular, and I think indeed the Foreign Secretary is due to go there shortly, is India. And the talk about possible trading relationship, free trade agreement with India as being a very good thing for the UK economy. How likely do you think that is? Oh, we seem to have lost the line to Canberra, or wherever it is that Prime Minister Rudd is speaking to us from. We'll try and re-establish that because I'm keen to get his view on what else the UK could do once outside the customs union and therefore potentially able to strike its own trade deals. We'll see if we can get the line back to Prime Minister Rudd in just a few moments. Let's come to Keith in Stoke Newington before we do. Hi there, Keith.
Morning, Tom. Yes, good morning.
Morning, sir. Just had to wait for the Prime Minister's line to drop off before we could come to you. Apologies for that.
No, I understand. Look, on this point, I think that the EU are never, ever going to agree a deal, whatever we propose to them. And the reason is, ever since they want to control us and dictate us. And the reason is because ever since 1600, when we were trading internationally against the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French and everybody else, we beat them all completely on international trade. And they're terrified of us. And therefore they want to control us. I mean, even in the 60s, the Germans even insisted that the city of London should be the financial centre.
Well, listen, Keith, it would be wonderful to have a sense from government about what it is they want to do with any newfound freedom that they would get from the so-called sunlit uplands that we are apparently heading to. We might put that to Dominic Raab. Keith, forgive me. I've got Prime Minister Rudd back on the line. Sorry about the drop-off there, Kevin. I was just asking about a potential trade deal with India, between the UK and India, now that the UK is out of the customs union. And whether that would be ultimately beneficial for the UK and how likely that would be.
Well, of all the arguments I've seen from the Brexiteers, as I wrote in the British media last year, I think that's the biggest bucket of bollocks I have heard so far.
Right.
The reason being is that the Indian Commerce Ministry, which I know very well from my own dealings with them over a long period of time, I launched the Australia-India Free Trade Agreement negotiations in 2009. They are nowhere near a conclusion in 2020 than they were back then. India could not even bring itself to join the so-called RCEP agreement, the regional free trade agreement in East Asia recently, which is a much lower quality free trade agreement than the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And that's because protectionism and mercantilism are alive and well in the Indian government, particularly since India has come under domestic...
Oh, we've lost it again. It seems so. As one of the things that we could do, perhaps, once we've got through this Brexit mess, is get better technological communications between the UK and Australia. That might help. Kevin Rudd, listen, I'm very grateful for your time. Apologies that we've had troubles with the line. Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, former Prime Minister of Australia, served between December 2007 and June 2010, and then again between June and September 2013. And as you heard, he's also the president of the Asia Policy Society, a think tank running out of the United States. 0345 6060 973 is the number. You can text 84850. You can tweet at LBC. That is the view of one former Australian Prime Minister about the Australia-style deal, so-called, that the UK government looks set now to be having with the European Union. We'll hear from another former Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, who is also an advisor to the UK on trade as well. We'll speak to that former Australian Prime Minister. Can't move for them on the programme at the moment. A little bit later on. Tom Swarbrick here, 10:30. Let's get some news headlines now. Here's Philip Chrysakos.
The Prime Minister and the President of the European Commission will speak at lunchtime, not tonight, to take stock of talks to secure a post-Brexit trade deal. This morning, those discussions continue in Brussels ahead of Boris Johnson and Ursula von der Leyen's self-imposed deadline of tonight. It's as the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab says there needs to be political willing to secure an agreement. Separately, it's emerged the government has spent £4 billion on minimising disruption to trade and travel in the event of a no-deal Brexit. The preparations include additional officers at the border to allow goods to flow and 20 different helplines to give advice to businesses. Ministers say they've practiced every single foreseeable scenario. One other headline this half hour, an investigation into a Conservative MP accused of rape, sexual assault and coercive control has reportedly been dropped by police. The former minister, who hasn't been identified and who denies all the allegations, was arrested in the summer and released on bail. The weather, wet and windy conditions in the west, spreading eastwards, reaching the far north and east by the afternoon. Some heavy rain at times, mainly over western hills. Brighter but showery conditions following into the west, a high of 12 degrees.
This is LBC. This is LBC Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster.
Morning to you. It's deadline day. We are expecting Boris Johnson and Ursula von der Leyen to speak at around lunchtime today, ahead of a decision being made on the viability of the current trade talks. And as we'll hear in a minute, the papers are absolutely full of the fact that no deal seems to be where we're heading at the moment. Tony and Totteridge will come to you in just a moment, but lbc.co.uk is where you need to start your day. lbc.co.uk. The terms offered by the European Union on a trade deal continue to be unacceptable as talks enter final day. You can read all about it there. Let's turn to the Sunday Express this morning. No deal. We are ready. Britain says EU offer is still unacceptable as the Prime Minister unveils plan to avoid Brexit chaos, including the boats in the Channel to patrol the waters and various arrangements made to get medicines and food supplies into the country should the border be a real problem, which it's looking like it's going to be, I'm afraid. Sunday Times, ministers warn supermarkets to stockpile food. Shortages feared as EU talks remain deadlocked. There's detail in here about Tesco's apparently reinvigorating some previously mothballed warehouses to stock tinned tomatoes and pasta in the event that there are problems at the border. The Sunday Telegraph, billions in no-deal help for farmers and factories. 4 areas of the economy identified as those most in need of assistance should talks fail. We actually spoke to George Eustace about this last week on the programme. This is what happens when tariffs get applied, is that you end up having to spend taxpayers' money here bailing out industries that are hammered by those tariffs. And that potentially is what we're going to see for farmers in this country should we move to those WTO terms. The Observer, Tory grandees fury over PM's nationalist no-deal Brexit. Worst decision in our times, says Michael Heseltine. Fears grow over New Year chaos threat. We'll speak to the former Chancellor Ken Clarke a little bit later in the programme today. The Sunday Mirror, Brexit talks go to the wire. Hours from a no deal, they say. Prime Minister says offer on the table is still unacceptable. And the Mail, Merkel wants Britain to, quote, crawl across broken glass. Chancellor Angela Merkel being blamed for European Union's hard line. One source said that she was determined to make Britain crawl across broken glass rather than reach a compromise. Doesn't sound particularly like something Angela Merkel would say, to be honest with you, but nevertheless, the Mail on Sunday repeating those claims from government insiders saying that it is the German Chancellor who is making life very difficult when it comes to getting that deal. Would it be a problem? Here's Tony in Totteridge. Hiya, Tony.
Hello, yes. I'm surprised that an Australian Prime Minister doesn't realise the problems that we have with the European Union. I mean, Britain wanted to import tomatoes from Italy, from Australia, but the European Union blocked it when we were still a member because Italy said it would damage their export business. I mean, dozens of countries trade on world trade terms very happily with no problems. I think would be absolutely, we're now teeth that they want to take part of our fishing rights and still control us.
So you are quite happy with the WTO outcome, Tony?
Why not? Dozens of countries are happy with it.
Well, they're not, as you heard the Australian Prime Minister say, they're not that happy with their WTO arrangement. That's why they're trying to negotiate with the EU to make it better and get better access.
But loads of countries operate without negotiating trade deals with Europe.
Well, they do, but it's clearly not as good as having a trade deal, is it?
It reminds me of a scene in The Godfather where Marlon Brando says, I just got out and now they're dragging me back in. They're trying to pull us back in to control us as they've always tried to.
So that would leave us in a position where we would never get a trading arrangement.
Why do we want? Why can't we trade?
Well, because clearly it is demonstrably better to have a trading relationship with a big trading partner like the European Union or India or America or wherever, or Australia. And when you have a country that is saying, hang on a sec, Tony, you have a country that has already got the same agreements that we are about as a nation to reach towards on January the 1st, saying we've spent years trying to make them better.
Well, I mean, what's wrong with the whole of the world? Is the world bigger than Europe? Of course it is. We can trade independently with loads of countries, America, Canada, Australia, India. There's no reason that we tie ourselves in to what Daniel Hannan, who's he? Well, he was an MP, a European member of Parliament, and he knew the inside of the European Union. And he wrote a pamphlet some time back saying, I'm part of an antiquated organisation.
He did, but he's also somebody who said that we wouldn't need to leave the single market.
Didn't need to. His whole point was that we should leave. But
you have Boris Johnson saying that leaving the single market, there would be no need to leave the single market. This has been part of the problem, that you've had those who are now arguing that WTO is the only and best outcome from the UK, having years ago said that was the last thing that we'd need to do.
Well, they've changed their mind. They've realised the fallacy of being within the European Union. But it's a closed shop that wants to restrain trade. It's not a free trade area, is it? We had a free trade area. Well,
it's a trade area that, like every other trading body, whether it's bilateral or multilateral, is going to have rules to access. Tony, thank you. I want to get to Milan, who's in Ashford in Surrey. Hi, Milan. Milan, hi, can you hear us?
Hi, I can hear you now. Yeah.
You're on the radio, sir. Hi.
This is an absolute shambles. It's so embarrassing. But yeah, it's Groundhog Day. The reason we're in this mess, and it's a controversial reason, but it's the facts of the facts. Leavers are allergic to facts, details, and the law. Whenever the conversation comes up to those points,
go on, Milan,
they want to move the conversation on, or they start going on about other things, like the absolute lie just now, and with your interview with John Redwood, which is appalling, I'd say, is that ignore
John
the
Redwood?
fact that, yeah, that was early in the week.
Okay. Oh, Milan, you're good. Well listened, Milan. I like it.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's going on about, the majority of the world trade on WTO terms. That ignores the fact of the EU treaty database, which has hundreds of trade and cooperation agreements. So it isn't a simple fact of just WTO terms. It's all these agreements.
What it points to, Milan, what it points to is, it strikes me that there is an acceptance within the British government that is much easier to negotiate, to converge. So from a point of being completely outside to then start arranging deals for financial services or in the way that Australia have, than it is to try and agree to an arrangement to diverge, because it's going to create so many problems. So actually, I wonder whether the conclusion of the British state now is, well, let's come out and let's start again by negotiating different deals for different sectors of the economy. So basically, we're going to be negotiating and changing our trading relationship with the EU for years and years and years.
That's true, but actually the goalposts seem to be moving all the time for leavers. We were supposed to be in sunlit uplands, have the same benefits as soon as we leave. Now, the goalposts seem to be moving and saying, well, we'll survive, we'll have running water. The leaders have to decide what they want to do. You cannot have complete independence and have unfettered access on the same arrangements with the EU.
But I think that, again, that is understood, to be honest. And one of the interesting things, and I do want to ask the Foreign Secretary about this, Dominic Raab, when he joins us a bit later, Milan, I'm very keen to hear about what it is the British government is looking at doing with the freedom that would come with trading on WTO terms. What is it that is going to be sold to not just Brexiteers, but frankly to everybody in this country, that is going to be of benefit to us when we come out in this fashion? Milan, thank you. I want to get Simon in Orpington on. Hi there, Simon.
Tom, good morning. I hope you're well. I think the main reason people voted for Brexit was the issue of sovereignty. And the Remain camp always told us, no, we've always been a sovereign nation. And yet here we are trying to do a trade deal. The reason the trade deal isn't getting over the line is because the EU is trying to tie us into this level playing field and put restrictions on our corporation tax, what we do around state aid, employment rights. So surely that shows that we weren't sovereign if we don't have the control over these. Now,
no, but we're sovereign to make the decision. That's the point. We can agree to them if we like. And indeed, Ursula von der Leyen, and again, we'll put this to Mr. Raab, but Ursula von der Leyen was very clear this week in saying that they're not requiring the UK to follow us every time we decide to raise our level of ambition. We would simply adapt the condition to access to the market based on decisions of the UK. We're perfectly free to choose what we want to do. It's just it has consequences.
Who makes the final decision? The point is the EU Commission makes the final decision. Look, the EU signed up to a trade deal with Canada.
That's because it's in a trading relationship with us.
Tom, say that again.
That's because it's in a trading relationship with us. It gets to decide too on the interests of its own citizens.
Right, but the EU signed up to a trade deal with Canada and didn't tie them into a level playing field. Again, I know Remainers will say, oh yes, but that's because they're thousands of miles away. Well, exactly. Is this political project not about facilitating trade? Is it about stifling competition? Because they don't want us to reduce our corporation tax. They don't want us to reduce our VAT. Now, why? Because they don't want us to become too competitive. That's what it's all about. It's not about facilitating trade between individual businesses. It's about maintaining the project.
Well, look, I would agree with you on the point that I think the European Union is demonstrably worried about what it is the UK could do to make itself, quote unquote, more competitive should it come out in that fashion. And we'll see if those are some of the things that the UK government is thinking about doing. Simon, thank you. 0345 6060 973 is the number, 84850 to text. You can tweet at LBC. When you hear these stories of tinned tomatoes being stockpiled by Tesco's in a warehouse somewhere, or the pasta that's being flown in at an unbelievable rate to avoid any queues that might come, are you sort of more willing to accept the disruption that is to come on the basis that we've had a year of disruption in a way that nobody really could have foreseen, and we've sort of dealt with it? I mean, we can argue about the way how well we've dealt with it, but actually we could cope. We coped this time with the pandemic. We can cope with a shortage of vegetables for a few months. We'd be all right. And so that is part of your sort of acceptance of a WTO Brexit, that we'll just get through it. 0345 6060 973. We'll speak to the Shadow Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Labour's Steve Reed, in just a few moments' time on the programme. Tom Swarbrick here, 10:46.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast, weekday mornings from 7.
Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden. Might we be looking at testing as well as school children in counties such as Kent, Essex and possibly Hertfordshire?
1 in 3 people who have COVID are asymptomatic, and that's why testing is so important and why we're rolling it out to schools, so we can identify those kids that have COVID and aren't showing the symptoms.
Was it a mistake to open the schools when the government did then?
No, not at all. It's vital, particularly for kids from deprived backgrounds, to get into school.
Coming up this Monday on Nick Ferrari at breakfast, the return of Call Kia. Put your questions to the leader of the Labour Party, LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Text 84850.
I'm getting so cynical, but having gone through years and years of this, I think you can't help but be a little bit cynical. I've just seen a tweet from Daniel Boffey, who is The Guardian's Brussels bureau chief, who has tweeted to say that Boris Johnson and Ursula von der Leyen to talk at noon Brussels time. There is some positivity in the air. Now, I'm not sure where Mr. Boffey is finding this positivity, but everything that we're seeing in the Sunday papers this morning about tariffs and millions having to be spent to bail businesses out and supermarkets having to stockpile things is exactly the kind of thing you would be saying if you were not only preparing for no deal, but also trying to set the ground for a deal to happen. So who knows where we are, but we're about to find out. Let's turn to Labour's Steve Reid, Shadow Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Labour MP for Croydon North. Welcome to the programme this morning, Mr. Reid. I don't know if you sense any positivity anywhere. What is Labour's plan then for if a deal were to come back?
Well, the key thing is we do need that deal over the line, don't we? But it's 1 year and 1 day exactly since Boris Johnson won an 80-seat majority in the House of Commons on a promise to get Brexit done on the back of an oven-ready deal that he told us was ready to be
That was
signed.
the withdrawal agreement.
No, yeah, he was talking about a deal, a trade deal. He said a trade deal.
No, it wasn't. Not on the oven. No, it wasn't. Not on the oven. Sorry, Mr. Reid, but on the oven-ready deal, that was specifically the withdrawal agreement. He had agreed during the election last year that he could promise that the arrangements for a trade deal were going to be forthcoming, but the oven-ready bit was the withdrawal agreement.
He was so far along that, the lines of saying that. He said there was no need to even make contingency plans for no deal because it wasn't going to happen because he had a deal. Now, that's a trade deal, not a withdrawal agreement that he was talking about there. So what needs to happen now is Boris Johnson needs to stick to his promise to get that deal over the line. The British economy has been putting up with 4.5 years now of incredible uncertainty. It's really difficult for businesses to invest, to plan without that certainty. The only way this comes to an end is to get a deal done and to get it done as soon as possible. Now, it's first I've heard about this conversation at midday today, but we all need that to go the right way because no deal actually isn't an end point. It just means we start negotiations with Europe again from next year, but from an even weaker position.
But even if signing up to a deal meant that the UK government was to sign up to Brussels rules in perpetuity and had no ability to change those rules and had no ability to diverge further from those rules, do you think the government should sign it?
Well, this is where the whole thing gets a little bit surreal because the thing that Boris Johnson says he wants the ability to diverge from isn't something where he says he wants to diverge. So it all gets very, very surreal. So what he wants is the ability to weaken down employment rights or environmental protections. Something
not necessarily. Not necessarily. Exactly corporation tax, VAT, there are a whole range of measures that could be taken once outside structures in the European Union.
The nub of the disagreement, as we understand it, is on environmental protections and employment rights. Now, the only reason he would want those powers is because he wants to lower them in the United Kingdom. Now, the 17 million people that voted for Brexit didn't do it to reduce their own...
Well, if he does, Mr. Reid, you and the Labour Party will be the ultimate beneficiary because you will be able to say when the election rolls around, look, they deregulated from standards that protected people. If anything, politically, it's an open goal for you guys.
But I'm trying not to see this in terms of one party's advantage over another. This is about our country now. We had the referendum 4.5 years ago. That is settled now. We're out of the European Union. It's a settled question. The whole point now is about how we move forward as a country. And we're in the middle now of an unprecedented pandemic. The United Kingdom has suffered the worst economic recession of any major economy, the deepest recession for 300 years. We need to be focusing now on growing back out of that recession, and the hit that a no-deal Brexit would do would be to slow that down and stop it. 1 million people have already lost their jobs. That's enough. We need to be looking forwards now.
Let me just ask you about, it's remarkable that it's come to the pandemic being a sort of side issue here, but we are living through it. Let me ask you about the pandemic. I note that it's just being reported that Germany is to go into another national lockdown over Christmas due to rising cases of coronavirus. New measures will last from the 16th of December until the 10th of January. Schools and non-essential shops will be closed. And yet here, of course, the government is allowing 5 days of a degree of freedom to have people go around the country. Do you think that 5 days of freedom should be stopped?
Well, we have to follow the science, don't we? But I believe we're due a review on the 16th of December, where London leaders and health officials will get together to decide what needs to happen. But we're also hearing that London leaders are being called into a conversation today with the Department of Health. I don't know what that's about yet, but there have been worrying signs that the rate of infection may be increasing. Now, we need to follow the science on this. We need to do everything necessary to protect lives and livelihoods at this point in the pandemic. The government's currently planning to have a relaxation over the Christmas period. I'm not sure, as things stand, that they've done enough to properly plan for that. If a lot of people are going to travel around the country, what measures...
So would you want to see, if cases continue to rise, sorry to interrupt, Mr. Reid, but if cases continue to rise over the coming days, could you see a position where Labour would start to say to the government very clearly, you need to rethink Christmas, you need to stop these freedoms being allowed?
Well, we'll need to see where we are and we'll need to follow the science on that. But as things stand, the government should be planning to make it as safe as possible to have that relaxation. So the point I was going to make there was about public transport. We saw in the United States over Thanksgiving a big increase in the rate of infections as people travelled across the country. I'm not sure the government's put enough planning yet to manage the numbers of people that will be on public transport and make sure we're not spreading the virus in a way that makes it go out of control.
Mr. Reid, good to have you on the programme. Steve Reid, thank you. Shadow Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Labour MP for Croydon North. Just before the headlines at 11, let's get Richard in St Albans on the radio. Hi there, Richard.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
Morning, sir. Yeah, your thoughts?
So what I'm going to say. So yeah, I want to talk about so let's put a bit of a few statistics there. World trade is about $20 trillion. It's probably a little bit less, obviously, for obvious reasons. But the EU has a very poor track record of agreeing trade deals. Just Google their own website. They're very good at signing a deal with, very small countries, but they're pretty poor.
Yeah, it's normally the walloons that upset trade deals, but yeah.
Yeah, and also if you look at the data, the EU is a declining percentage of world trade. So, this brings me on to the fact we've got to sort this out with the EU, and then we've got to look more globally. We talk about ourselves being a global country, and then that brings me on to the subject of India. So I've had the privileged position of living in India, had a diplomatic passport. I was one of the people that developed the UK-India Business Council. I've seen it from a practical perspective within the EU and globally. So, I think we're going to have a lot of problems because I don't think we're very good at engaging with places like India and China. So,
well, you just had, I don't know if you heard it, Richard, but the former Prime Minister of Australia, Kevin Rudd, on the programme, using a word to describe the idea that we could have a trading relationship, free trade agreement with India, as a word beginning with B that I'm not going to repeat on the radio. Absolutely scathing about it.
Yeah, that's because we don't understand India, because I'll very, very politely call it a lack of emotional due diligence by the Brits. The other way to look at the Brits, unfortunately, and I can give you hundreds of examples, and I've also helped very famous, world-famous investors and people looking at India, and some of them have said yes, and some we just don't get the place. We think it's a theme park.
Well, listen, I think this plays into a lot of an understanding that sailing out onto open waters to be able to trade with the rest of the world, they're quite choppy, actually. In fact, they're very, very choppy right now, so it's not going to be easy. Hey, Richard, thank you very much indeed for your call. Fascinating to speak to you. Many more of your calls to come. Plus, after the news headlines at 11, you can't move for ex-Australian Prime Ministers on this programme. We spoke to Kevin Rudd half an hour ago. In a moment, Prime Minister Tony Abbott, former Prime Minister of Australia, who's advising the UK on trade, will join us here on Swarbrick on Sunday.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 11 o'clock. The Prime Minister and the President of the European Commission are speaking on the telephone right now, taking stock of post-Brexit trade talks between their negotiators. It sounds the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab is accusing the European Union of making outlandish proposals ahead of tonight's self-imposed deadline by Boris Johnson and Ursula von der Leyen. Danuta Huebner, a Polish MEP who sits on the Brexit steering group of the European Parliament and chairs the European Parliament's Constitutional Affairs Committee, has told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC if there is a no-deal Brexit, the European Union won't be to blame.
It has never been the option for the European Union. We understood it can happen by accident, by a political decision on the UK side, but it has never been our option. But we have to protect this market because we want to have the British goods in our market. That's just the basic criterion for entering the market without borders. So I'm sure that UK negotiators understand it perfectly because they have been for more than 45 years with us.
But Conservative MP Daniel Kaczynski has told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC that assessment is wrong.
The Polish representative has given a very one-sided perspective of the whole situation. We clearly cannot sign up to being ongoing rule takers from the European Union. But of course, if we were to agree to their terms, we would become a vassal state.
In other headlines this hour, Germany is to go back into lockdown. Chancellor Angela Merkel says existing coronavirus restrictions in the country have failed to get COVID-19 under control. It means schools in Germany will close, as will most shops from Wednesday until the 10th of January, after daily infections and the number of related deaths reached record highs in recent days. It's reported a criminal investigation into a former Conservative minister has been dropped. The unidentified MP has been accused of rape, sexual assault and coercive control, allegations he's always denied. Around 45 countries who took part in yesterday's online UN summit on climate action appear to have put forward new plans to speed up goals to reduce greenhouse gases. The event marked the 5th anniversary of the International Paris Agreement, committing countries to limiting temperature rises. A Virgin Galactic spacecraft has returned safely to Earth despite a rocket motor failing to launch. If the flight was successful, it could have led to the start of commercial trips being taken. Anthony Joshua says he wants the WBC belt after retaining his boxing titles against Kubrat Pulev at Wembley Arena in London. He's expected to take on Tyson Fury for it in what's already being billed as a Battle of Britain next year.
LBC weather.
With Halls, help is at hand this winter.
Those wet and windy conditions in the west spreading eastwards through the day, reaching the far north and the east by the afternoon. Some heavy rain at times, mainly over western hills, brighter but showery conditions following into the west, a high of 12 degrees. From Global's newsroom, I'm Philip Chrysikos.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Very good morning to you. Just gone 11 o'clock. You are listening to and watching Swarbrick on Sunday here on LBC on this Brexit deadline day. Yes, another one. You just know that it's going to roll over, don't you? There's no way that it's going to be agreed today. You know it's going to be pushed into next week. 0345 6060 973 is my number to join the conversation this morning. All the thoughts are, and indeed the papers are full of the fact that it seems we may well be heading to a no deal, a WTO trading terms, or what is euphemistically known as an Australia-style deal. We heard from former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd in the last hour of the programme. You'll hear from another one, former Aussie PM Tony Abbott, who is also advising the UK government on trade. He's going to be joining us in about 20 minutes' time to find out really from him whether he would advise the UK government to take a so-called Australian-style deal. Come to your calls on this as well. We're going to be joined in a moment by the former Conservative Chancellor, Lord Ken Clarke, but I'm delighted to say that Jack Straw joins us, former Labour MP for Blackburn until 2015, and of course Foreign Secretary for 5 years between 2001 and 2006. Very good to have you on the programme this morning, Mr. Straw. Your thoughts about the UK's place in the world if we head to a WTO trading relationship with the EU?
Well, it becomes more difficult. It's not, I mean, this is not, if we leave, I was passionately in favour of us staying within the European Union, but I've never been a kind of somebody who believes that Armageddon lies on the other side, and most people who took the same position as I did in favour of our membership of the European Union have obviously got used to the idea we're going to leave, and we'll just have to make the best that we can of it. However, it will be more difficult because one of the things that was available to us as member of the European Union was we had natural day-to-day, week-by-week contact with our European partners. Originally, when I first became Foreign Secretary, it was 15, then it rose over that period to 27. And if you wanted to sort something out, which was bilateral or to do with the United Nations or bodies like that, particularly with France, but also with Germany and some of the other countries, you could sort it out in what you call the margins of a meeting. So if we want to maintain Britain's position of considerable influence in the world, it does mean that we'll have to do a lot more bilateral diplomacy, ministers flying off to Paris and to not so much to Brussels, Paris and to Berlin, things like that, in order to manage our representation.
I wonder then what you make of, sorry to interrupt, Mr. Straw, but the EU conducting itself in a pragmatic bilateral way may well have been helpful during these talks, actually, because at the moment it doesn't seem that has been the modus operandi. And in fact, we read earlier this week that Merkel and Macron refused to take Prime Minister Johnson's calls for fears that there was going to be some sort of division tried to make happen between the member states. Do you think that the European Union would operate on a bilateral basis, country to country, with the UK?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think my reading of that refusal to take calls from Prime Minister Johnson to Macron and Merkel was that what Mr. Johnson was seeking was a meeting with van der Leyen, Merkel and Macron on the same call. It wasn't, I don't think Macron or Merkel would dream of refusing to take a call from them. And this is where there is a genuine problem with the way the EU operates, which frustrates anybody who ever had to deal with it. Because it's 27 members, it can be a bit rigid. So they all keep saying we're really united. And up to a point that's true, because in order to have a negotiation on behalf of 27 people, you have to have pretty clear written instructions, which everybody agrees to, and then which, on a day-by-day basis, France and Germany are willing to put up with. So it means that they necessarily are less fleet of foot than a single negotiator, which is, in this case, the British government.
And I wonder if you think that there are the EU in its way of operating is becoming outdated. And actually, some of the ideological parts of the single market and the European Union per se are being undermined, and the EU ought to reflect on that as it looks to the future without Britain inside it.
The EU as an idea is certainly not outdated at all. I mean, having a single market of however many million it is, which is just it's a good idea because it reduces friction across borders and makes trade easier. And critically, which is the reason why I always say strongly supported it, having a political operation across Europe in place of Europe's propensity to argue to a point where we ended up killing each other in vast numbers, and not just in the last century, but in previous centuries as well, is an extremely good idea. The way the EU operates, yes, it is bureaucratic. And one of the problems we faced right from the day we joined in 1973 is that we have a different basis for our legal system. And our legal system, in a sense, is more pragmatic than that which operates inside the European Union, which is based on civil law, on Roman law. And also, of course, they have to have a written constitution, whatever you call it. And most individual countries have all the individual countries of the Europe have a written constitution, which themselves are pretty inflexible. And every single EU country, I think bar none, has in the last 100 years had a total disruption, either through occupation, through subordination, to the Soviet Union, through fascism, or through war. And we, and to a degree, Ireland, which was neutral in the war, are the only countries which have not experienced that. So our background is different. And the result of this is that in order to maintain unity inside the European Union, people stick to what's called the black letter law, the rules. Now, the British government says it wants a trade deal, says it always has wanted one. It needs to take account of that, because if you're negotiating, doesn't matter who it is with, the first thing you've got to do is to understand where the other side is coming from and what the constraints on it are. And I mean, frankly, Mr. Johnson should have known that von der Leyen was the person given the mandate to negotiate. And it wasn't going to help for suddenly Mr. Johnson to decide he wanted Macron and Merkel in the room at the same time. I mean, it's certainly a good idea if Johnson gets on the phone to Merkel and Macron on the side and says, look, I think we could land this, provided you can give a bit here and I'll give a bit here. And how does that sound?
I just wonder, Mr. Straw, too, whether they're seeking flexibility over the course of the next few hours, which, based on your description of how the EU operates, is not something that's going to be readily forthcoming. But also whether or not, actually, more broadly, the European Union, not just in the way it operates, but also what it is not the future. And we're told by those who supported Brexit and others that actually, if you need to cast your eyes further afield, whether it's to the Far East or to the Near East, that's where the growth markets are, that's where the development is. And Britain can now be much more fleet of foot in going to those places and speaking to those leaders and saying, right, let's do some business with you.
Well, that was, of course, part of the argument 4.5 years ago. But, I mean, it's belied by the experience of Germany. Germany is completely committed to the European Union and the single market. It has grown its exports to China exponentially compared with the United Kingdom. I mean, it just so the single market and our external tariffs were never a block in the way of doing business in the Far East. It's simply irrelevant, and in a sense. Because we are no longer a leading member of this huge trading bloc, we are in a weaker negotiating position when it comes to trying to develop effective and good trade links, except on certain products when with certain countries. So I'm afraid I don't buy into that. However, I mean, provided we're not in a situation on January the 1st where there is no deal and there is chaos at the borders, we still have a future. And if I was in government, I'd say to people, well, we had a referendum. We've got to put up with the results, whether you like it or not. We've got to make the best of it. That's what you have to do in life. And so, I mean, the thing I'm very confident about is Britain has a very great future, but it does require some, I think, greater inspiration by Mr. Johnson than he's offering. And one of the things that really worries me here, Thomas, just to say this, is that if he fails to land a deal, this is going wholly to exacerbate Scottish nationalism. And we could end up in 5 months' time with the elections in Scotland and Wales, but in Scotland particularly, with the SNP having an absolute majority in the Scottish Parliament, passing a resolution saying they're going to have a referendum. Now, Mr. Johnson can say, and he's got good reasons for saying it, well, hang on, we're not going to approve a referendum, which is Westminster's right, because you, Nicholas, you said 6 years ago, this was a decision for a generation, and this is not a generation. But that ignores the dynamics of this. And so you could even have the SNP organising their own informal referendum, and then we'll be faced with a really serious constitutional crisis. And if Scotland were to leave the United Kingdom, that would weaken us internationally. There's no doubt about that.
Just very finally, and in a sentence, Mr. Straw, the decision then for Keir Starmer is pretty clear, isn't it? Any deal that comes back, he's got to vote for it.
I think that's the case. Because any deal is likely to be better than no deal. I don't think, just to pick up your introduction, I don't think this will be over today, whatever happens.
No.
So even if they say we can't reach a basis for a decision, and there is then no deal on January the 1st, there could be a deal by the January the 31st. These things
yes, well, you speak as someone who's been in politics an awful long time, and so your cynicism is well founded. Jack Straw, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time on the programme this morning. Former Labour MP for Blackburn and, of course, former Labour Foreign Secretary between 2001 and 2006. 0345 6060 973 is the number, 84850 to text. I wonder if in welcoming, perhaps, as you may well do, a WTO Brexit, sort of freed as we may well be from elements of the European Union, that it is that global vision that, the markets are developing in other areas of the world, that we need to get out there and use the pragmatism that we've got and now the fleet of foot as a country that we may well have to go and target those markets, because that is where Britain's best interests lie, not in the European Union. Whether some of the descriptions about having to do trade deals with those countries and then being incredibly difficult makes you think again, or is this the moment where we sail out onto calmer waters with the horizon ahead of us that we can go and exploit because we are no longer shackled, would be the word. 0345 6060 973. More of your calls to come. Tom Swarbrick here, 11:16.
This is LBC. This is LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick. Live from Westminster. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
So is it an Australian-style deal that beckons? We already heard from one former Australian Prime Minister on the programme this morning, former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. I'm delighted to say that another joins us, former Prime Minister Tony Abbott, who is also a trade advisor to the UK government and, of course, served as the Aussie PM from 2013 to 2015. Thank you very much indeed for being there for us, Mr. Abbott. Firstly, your view, your personal view on whether or not you would advise the UK government to go for a WTO trading deal.
Well, Tom, obviously the best outcome at this stage would be a Canada-style free trade deal between the European Union and the United Kingdom. And frankly, if it's good enough for Canada, which has never been part of the EU, why wouldn't it be good enough for Britain, which has been part of the EU, particularly because it would preserve, to a very great extent, the existing trade relationships between Britain and the countries of the EU. So a Canada-style deal would be best. But if for whatever reason the EU is determined to punish Britain for having the temerity to leave, you can trade with the EU on WTO terms. Australia has been doing it for as long as the EU exists, and we currently do about $100 billion worth a year of trade with the EU on WTO rules. So it will be a little disruptive. It will be a little difficult, but it is very doable. And no one in Britain should think that it is some kind of a disaster if what it ends up doing from the 1st of January is trading with the EU on WTO rules. Because let's face it, people in Europe buy British goods not because Britain is part of the EU. They buy British goods because they are good and they want them, and they will continue wanting
Mr. Abbott, what part of the EU's negotiating position would you say seeks to punish Britain?
Well, the mere fact that the EU doesn't re-offer what it previously offered, which is a Canada-style free trade deal, suggests to me that the attitude of the EU over the last couple of years has hardened. I think that the whole problem with the EU is that to Britain it was an economic project, but to the French particularly, it was a political project. Britain was more than happy to be part of the old European economic community when it was basically about a free trade area. But once Britain worked out that it was really about ever closer union and ultimately sublimating yourself into a European superstate, I think the British people quite rightly had some objections. Now, Britain should be able to do its own thing, go its own way, without being punished by the EU. And that's why I think it's really a little bizarre that the EU hasn't simply gone ahead and given Britain the same deal that it's been happy to give to Canada.
You've suggested that it wouldn't be ideal, but if British people were sitting here this morning thinking it would be a disaster, then they'd be wrong. Mm-hmm. I want to play you this, if I may. This is one of your predecessors, Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, on the programme a little earlier. This is what he had to say about the effects of a WTO trading relationship.
My own personal position as a friend of the United Kingdom for a long period of time, I'm often there. We spend a fair bit of time in the UK, many friends in British politics, on both sides of British politics. We want Britain to succeed. That's the Australian view of the United Kingdom. And my long-standing view is that Brexit is madness, period, from a British perspective. Europe is much stronger by having Britain in it, and Britain is much stronger for being in Europe. But now that you've decided to have a divorce, the terms of this divorce, I firmly believe would be best executed on the basis of a negotiated deal. An untidy divorce is bad for Britain, bad for Europe, and bad for the West.
Is Kevin Rudd wrong, Mr. Abbott?
Well, obviously, it would be much better to have a Canadian-style deal than no deal. But if it turns out to be no deal, that's not Britain's fault. That's the EU's fault. And look, I see my role as an advisor for the Board of Trade as essentially being a cheerleader for Britain. Britain is the world's 5th largest economy. No country on earth has had as much impact on the modern world as this one. When you think of the world's common language, the mother of parliaments, the Industrial Revolution, the emancipation of minorities, no country on earth has been more influential than Britain. And if any country on earth is more than capable of standing on its own 2 feet, it's this one. If I may say so, Tom, part of the problem from the very beginning of the whole EU enterprise has been this declinism and defeatism, which has been too widespread amongst the British establishment, even to this day. And I fear that even now, there are many people in the British establishment who would like Brexit to be more difficult than it needs to be, because they never wanted Britain to leave. And if
Civil
Brexit
servants?
is difficult, this confirms their long-held view that it shouldn't have been done. But there was a democratic vote, 52 to 48, confirmed in two subsequent general elections that Britain was going to leave.
Who is it that the Trojan horse?
It is going to happen, and it needs to happen on the best possible terms. If the EU is making life difficult, well, that's the EU's fault. But as far as Britain
it's not just in your view, Mr. Abbott. It's not just the EU. Sorry to talk over you, sir, but it's not just the EU that's making life. It is absolutely, but it's not just the EU that's making life difficult, as you have suggested, sir. Sorry, Mr. Abbott. You've said that there's a sort of another ulterior individuals or groups of people who would like to see Brexit fail. I just wondered who they are, in your view.
Well, you just had Kevin Rudd.
But he's not involved in Brexit in any way.
Convict himself out of his own mouth. Look, there are vast numbers of people, the ones
involved in Brexit, involved in the running of the country.
Theresa May called the citizens of nowhere, as opposed to the citizens of somewhere, who want Britain to be part of this European superstate. The British people, in the referendum and in two subsequent general elections, decided to leave, and they confirmed that. The important thing now is to make the best possible go of global Britain. And
okay, well,
please,
in that vein,
people of Britain, do not sell yourselves short. Do not underestimate yourselves. You are more than capable of making your way in the world, because you have shaped the world in a way that no other country has.
I can feel the strains of Land of Hope and Glory rising to as you speak, Mr. Abbott. Just finally then, on this point of what we should do once we're out of the European Union and are able to do lots of different things, let me just ask you what you think it is that the UK government should be doing to take advantage of that freedom.
But Tom, please, what's wrong with Land of Hope and Glory?
Nothing. I love it.
Britain is
Mr. Abbott, I love
land
it.
of hope and glory, and the countries which Britain has helped to spawn around the world, likewise, are lands of hope and glory.
Absolutely.
Mr.
Abbott, I am I am massively proud of this country. I'm massively proud in enormous ways of this country. Asking questions does not mean that you're not particularly patriotic. So let me ask this one.
I'm happy to ask a few questions back.
Thank you very much. I look forward to it. What is it that you think the British government ought to do now with this newfound freedom that it's going to get out from being out of the European Union? What changes should it make to make it more competitive, to give it a greater advantage globally?
Well, obviously, what the British government is now trying to do is to get the best possible deal with the EU. And I hope even at the 11th hour, the EU will relent and give it the Canadian-style deal that was on offer before. But plainly, Britain should be talking to its Five Eyes partners, first and foremost, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, to get the best possible deal. Do not underestimate the goodwill towards Britain in the wider world. And frankly, the goodwill towards Britain in the wider world contrasts with what appears to be this bitterness on the part of not the people of Europe, but the EU negotiators, who seem to be determined to make life as difficult as possible by failing to offer Britain the Canada-style deal, which was an offer before.
So potentially changes in corporation tax or VAT. What are the things that the UK could do, maybe in the way that Australia has done, to make itself competitive as it seeks new ground on which to trade?
Well, the best thing to do is to have tax which is as low as possible and regulations which are as low as possible. You obviously need the strongest possible education system. You want a legal system which is as simple and as fair as possible. And of course, this is exactly what the United Kingdom has always had. It's always been the freest economy in the EU. One of the reasons why people from all over the world flock to Britain, particularly to London, is precisely because Britain has had a climate of freedom and fairness, which is so incredibly attractive to people from all walks of life, all cultures. I mean, that's why London is, to this day,
so lower corporation tax, lower the top rate of tax as well, perhaps?
Well, look, I'm all in favour of lower tax, but I'm not giving, as it were, instruction to the British government. I'm saying at this time, the important thing is to get the best possible deal from Europe, failing that, to get the best possible deal from your friends and partners across the globe. But most of all, let's not talk ourselves into some kind of frenzy of failure just because the EU is making Britain's life difficult. This, I regret to say, was probably always going to happen. But again, this is a country of extraordinary capability. And just because there may be some days of difficulty and disruption doesn't mean that the wider world is not going to welcome an independent, sovereign Britain looking to the world rather than to its friends across the English Channel for its future.
Just very finally, and I've asked for your thoughts on a wide range of areas that might be off your trade advice, but it's nevertheless interesting to hear your opinion on it. Just very finally, on the question of migrant boats that make their way across the Channel from France, do you think the British government should be tougher? I mean, we've heard lots about the Royal Navy and things like that, but would you advise, either sort of in your professional capacity or otherwise, would you advise the British government be tougher on those boats?
Well, Tom, I'm not familiar with all the different developments in that particular area of British government policy. All I can tell you is what we successfully did in Australia. And in the end, we had to turn the boats back. And where the boats were scuttled by their occupants and by the people smugglers, we gave people new boats and sent them back in unsinkable new boats. Now, I accept that there's only 22 miles between Britain and France at the narrowest point of the English Channel, as opposed to a couple of hundred miles between Java and Christmas Island. But in the end, the people smugglers need to know that their attempt to enter a country illegally by boat will not succeed. The way must be closed. And in Australia's case, we decided that that meant turning boats around and sending people back. And again, let me be absolutely blunt. It seems that the French may be stopping one or two of these ventures, but it seems that they are not doing nearly enough as a friendly neighbour to stop people leaving from France to go illegally to Britain.
Great to talk to you. Thank you very much for coming on the programme this morning. Tony Abbott, former Prime Minister of Australia and, of course, current trade advisor to the UK government. Great to see you. Thank you very much for coming on. We'll come to more of your thoughts on that and what we're seeing at the moment. And there is movement at the moment. I'm being told that the Prime Minister is to have a phone call with his cabinet shortly, which may well delay, unfortunately, the Foreign Secretary. The Prime Minister is due to speak to Cabinet, we're being told, after having spoken to Ursula von der Leyen. So there is movement this morning, whether it's a call to Cabinet to get their sign-off to stop the talks. Stand by, you're not going to want to miss it. It's 11:34. Let's get some news headlines on LBC. Here's Philip Chrysikos.
The Prime Minister and the President of the European Commission are currently taking stock of post-Brexit trade deal talks in a telephone call. It comes ahead of Boris Johnson and Ursula von der Leyen's self-imposed deadline of tonight. It's as the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab says there needs to be political willing to secure an agreement, but Labour's Community Secretary Steve Reid has told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC people in the UK cannot tolerate a no-deal outcome. Germany will go back into lockdown from this Wednesday after the number of daily coronavirus infections and related deaths reached a record high. Chancellor Angela Merkel admits the country's existing restrictions have failed to get COVID-19 under control. A man's been charged with actual bodily harm to police after officers were doused in petrol in Greater Manchester. A home was also set on fire in Farnworth near Bolton. One of the officers was taken to hospital. The weather: wet and windy conditions in the west, spreading eastwards and reaching the far north and the east through this afternoon. Some heavy rain at times, mainly over Western Hills. Brighter but showery conditions following into the west. A high of 12 degrees.
This is LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Never did find out what it was that the former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott wanted to ask me. We'll have to get him on again at some stage in the future. Now, listen, a bit of breaking news for you, which could well be very significant indeed. A spokesperson for the European Commission has said in the last few minutes that following the call with Prime Minister Boris Johnson, President Ursula von der Leyen will give a press statement in the next 6 or 7 minutes, we're being told. So a press statement is imminent from Ursula von der Leyen. You will hear it here live on LBC. Don't go anywhere. Simon's in Luton. Hi there, Simon.
Hi, Tom. How you going?
I'm well, sir.
Good, mate. Certainly, your show has been a bit of an Australian attack today with Mr. Rudd, Abbott, Mr. Abbott, and myself being Australian as well. So, how's
we welcome our Australian friends.
No, of course you do. But I suppose you may or may not welcome Australian friends under WTO rules. So, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, my interpretation of WTO, if we look at it globally. I believe, and I think a caller 2 hours ago that came onto your program suggested that WTO deals are worth around about $2 trillion per year, and he's correct. However, EU deals, including the UK, is worth about $3 trillion per year. So, are we cutting our nose off to spite our face?
In going to WTO?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, if you consider, there are, I believe, and I'm sure your callers will correct me if I'm wrong, there are about 160 countries that operate under WTO deals. Mm-hmm. I believe the collective value of WTO deals is about the entire output of France alone.
Isn't the value further diminished if, as part of trading on WTO terms, certainly as trading on them, if you've had preferential arrangements already in place with another trading partner, you end up having to spend taxpayers' money bailing out a variety of industries that now find themselves with enormous tariffs, including farmers, as we're being told this morning?
No, fair enough. But I mean, the net outcome is beneficial to anybody working under, for example, EU deals. I mean, if we look at, again, if I'm sure your listeners will correct me if I'm incorrect, the UK exports, the export value to the UK, to EU from the UK is about 43%. Mm-hmm. Exports from the EU into the UK is about 53%, give or take. Mm-hmm. So this sounds like a significant difference, and therefore the UK should be going, well, we make more money out of this current trade deal. But if you break it down to 27 countries, the impact per country is about 2% of deficiency if a deal does not move forward. It's not a big deal.
Well, listen, Simon, I think the British government and Boris Johnson and everybody else has been saying that they will strain every sinew to try and get a deal. Of course, we've been told that today is the day on which they're going to decide whether the talks can move forward. And I think in the next few minutes, we are about to get an indication of whether those talks can move forward. Simon, thank you very much indeed. Let me just bring you a bit more that's being reported now around the cabinet call that is due to take place after the Prime Minister has spoken to Ursula von der Leyen. We'll hear what he said to her in a statement from her in the next few moments. But worth saying that Steve Swinford at The Times is tweeting that Brexit talks are expected to be extended. Negotiations to come later in the week after further discussion. We'll wait to see what Ursula von der Leyen says, but my word, how many times have we been run up this particular flagpole of having a deadline looming and then, of course, to be buffed further on into the future. Chris is in Tower Hamlets this morning. Hi there, Chris.
Hi there. Thank God for Kevin Rudd and Jack Straw with a bit of intelligence and perspective.
You weren't a fan of Tony Abbott, no?
No, absolutely not. If we were relying on people with his ability to understand the economic situation, we'd all be doomed. I mean,
why?
I'll tell you why. I heard him say, I didn't write the exact words down, but he said something to the effect of, if there is a single country in the world that's capable of standing on its own 2 feet economically, it's this one. Well, why did we join Europe in the first place? I was old enough to remember why we joined, and it took years and years before they would let us in. Why? Because our economy was in such a poor state. We were the sick man of Europe. And yes, we've got a strong economy, but we've grown that economy while we've been a member of the European Union, not before.
But the as much as the trade has increased, so has the political part of the European Union. It was a trading bloc. It is now way beyond a trading bloc. It's a political union.
But where's the evidence that that's had any serious impact on us? I mean, I know all the nonsense from Nigel Farage about European armies, but where is the European army? Point to it. Where's it based? It's nonsense.
Well,
it's
you can absolutely...
It's also nonsense to suggest that the Royal Navy is going to start boarding French trawlers, because, again, I'm old enough to know what will happen. If we board French trawlers, they will blockade Calais and Boulogne and all the other French ports, and trade will come to a grinding halt.
I agree with you on that. And actually, again, I mean, listen, Chris, I'm going to finish that thought early, because I can see that Ursula von der Leyen is taking to the podium now. Let's hear what the European Commissioner has to say.
Good afternoon. I had a constructive and useful phone call with Prime Minister Boris Johnson. We discussed the major unsolved topics. Our negotiation teams have been working day and night over the recent days, and despite the exhaustion after almost 1 year of negotiations, and despite the fact that deadlines have been missed over and over, we both think that it is responsible at this point in time to go the extra mile. We have accordingly mandated our negotiators to continue the talks and to see whether an agreement can be reached, even at this late stage. The negotiations continue here in Brussels. Thank you so much.
And that looks to have been that. That's Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, confirming earlier suspicions that obviously they weren't going to reach a deadline on Sunday, because, of course, in these things, they always seem to be extended. So there you have it, that the exhausted negotiators are going to carry on, for it is deemed responsible of them to go the extra mile. Talks continue even at this late stage, says Ursula von der Leyen. I would love to know what has changed in the last few days to make it worthwhile continuing on in these talks. I mean, from everything that the Prime Minister said after their fish supper earlier on in the week, these huge differences still remain. It's very, very likely, he said in the week, that we were going to go to no deal. Great that a deal is still possible from my own point of view, to be honest with you. But where did this idea of a Sunday deadline come from? We'll come to more of your calls in a few moments' time. Tom Swarbrick here, 11:47.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast, weekday mornings from 7.
Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden, you seem to be getting into a war of words with one of the stars from The Crown. Says that your request for Netflix to show a disclaimer on the programme is a low blow, particularly at a time when the arts are struggling.
It is the case that it's a work of fiction. And if you look at a BBC or an ITV show, they frequently have a thing at the beginning saying that this is a work of fiction. I think it's perfectly reasonable for Netflix to do the same thing.
Coming up this Monday on Nick Ferrari at breakfast, the return of Call Kia. Put your questions to the leader of the Labour Party, LBC. This is LBC Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster.
Straight to your calls as talks continue right to the very end. As you heard Ursula von der Leyen say that talks will continue even at this late stage. It is responsible to go the extra mile. Steve's a new caller in Weybridge this morning. Hi there, Steve.
Good morning, Tom. Thanks for having me on. I'm a first-time caller.
Welcome to the show.
I've got a comment on the tariffs discussion that you're having. And basically my point is that the value of the pound has changed massively in the last few years, and that really affects the costs of British exports and imports as well, and that needs to be considered. And when we had the referendum, the euro was at 140, okay? Now it's at 110, so it's actually dropped by 25%. Mm-hmm. So that means British goods are now 25% cheaper than they were at the time of the referendum, and therefore the impact of tariffs, I think, on the UK will be much less than it will on the European Union, because they've had a 25% increase in their costs since the referendum.
And do you think, Steve, it should be the case that if, as is predicted, if we go to no deal, the tariffs then apply, that the UK should respond in kind, that we won't sort of take a separate decision to say, OK, we'll lower these tariffs, that the UK would put the tariffs on that the EU puts on?
Well, I think if that's possible, we should talk to them about that, certainly. But I think that they'll want to talk to us because, say, the cost of cars in Germany, that's already gone up by 25% since the European referendum. And now with the tariffs proposed on top, they're going to take a kind of double hit.
Do you feel, how comfortable then are you, Steve, with the idea of trading on WTO terms? As you heard Tony Abbott suggest that it's, it's not ideal, but it's hardly a disaster.
No, I agree with him. I think it all depends to some extent what happens to the pound. I mean, if the value of the pound drops a little bit after, if there is a no deal, which is probably likely, that will make our goods even cheaper.
Yeah. And can I ask you too about, I was taken by Tony Abbott's suggestion, which is reflected in some of the newspaper coverage today, that one of the things that the UK should do, or could do, and would make itself more competitive once it comes out of the European Union, let's say without a deal, is to massively lower corporation tax, lower the highest rate of tax, deregulate in a variety of areas, and make itself incredibly competitive.
Well, that's quite a radical agenda, which I'm not sure that the British people will be ready for. Personally, I'm not too keen on all of those measures, but we certainly need to look at the wider economy around the world and, trading.
But I wonder what it is, Steve. And I don't know which way you voted in the referendum, sir, but
I voted to leave.
Yeah. In the sunlit uplands, then, once you've arrived at the sunlit uplands and you're bathed in the warm glow of having come out, what do you do then? What does the country do then? I mean, what's the plan? I mean, there's a destination there, but then there's nothing. It strikes me that we haven't heard anything from the government about, OK, well, with this newfound freedom in the sunny uplands, we're going to do this, this, this and this.
I think I look at it a bit like having a divorce, really, in a family divorce. When you have a divorce, it's all very traumatic and horrible at the time. But then gradually you learn to come to terms with it, and you think of ways of working together and, sorting things out in the longer term. I think there's a lot of short-term damage going to happen at the moment, but I think in the longer term, hopefully things will calm down and we'll find a new way of living together with...
I get, well, how long is long-term and how much damage do we have to sustain before we get there? Steve, listen, great to talk to you. Thank you for your call. Make sure it's not your last of the programme. Here's a text on 84850. Tom, honestly, this interview with Tony Abbott is the most salient conversation I've heard you have in a long time. I don't know what that says about the conversation. The UK is going to be great and commands the respect of the world because of stuff we did over 100 years ago. Sure thing. Sounds like Tony has really surveyed a lot of genuine international opinions for that transparent nonsense. Oh, and as long as we become a low regulation, low tax haven, thanks, Tony. Genius stuff, says Leah. Here's Darren in Chelmsford. Hi there, Darren.
Hi there, Tom. It was good to have Tony Abbott on there. Very, very much agree with most of what he said, and that last corner was really, really good. My main concern is that if we don't have... Liz Truss has gone to a lot of effort to put in place 58 trade deals over the last year. If we don't, if we end up on a level playing field, then some of those deals will be in jeopardy because that they were entered into with the other country knowing that we're going to be in a position...
No, I don't think Darren, I don't know the intricacies of all of those deals, but it would surprise me if the UK has decided to negotiate these continuity arrangements with these countries on the basis that if we were... Hang on a sec, Darren. On the basis that...
I'm not...
Sorry, Darren, on the basis that if we sign up to those trade deals and then sign up to an EU one, those trade deals are going to have to be renegotiated. That would seem to me to be
not if
really,
we've got a
really
free
quite
trade
dumb.
agreement with the EU. It's only if we're involved in the level playing field. And the other point that I want to make is that lots of the supermarkets that talk about them stockpiling goods, we look, in this country, we buy items on price or need. If we've got trade deals with other countries where we're working on WTO rates or rates that are beneficial for goods that we require in this country from those other trade deals, then we can bring goods and markets in from other places. Therefore, the goods in the shops will change over time. People will look for the products that they want at the price that they want, rather than paying the exorbitant prices and the delays.
Well, let me read you this. Let me read you this very quickly. This is a senior consultant to one of the biggest supermarkets, who's quoted in the Sunday Times this morning. Supermarkets and ministers are hugely worried about panic buying. They saw what happened over COVID when people started hoarding toilet rolls and know how quickly it can go wrong. That will be nothing compared to what will happen. Meat supplies will be fine and fruit comes from South America, but there are likely to be shortages of vegetables for 3 months.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that we won't go, like your last caller said, there's going to be some transition problems, but people buy things from the places. There will be...
They do, but if they can't get them, then that's a problem. But Darren, what if sorry to interrupt, Darren, once again, but if the short-term problems turn out to be you can't get your hands on carrots for 3 months, explain to people what the benefit then is. What is it that you're looking past and looking towards once we've got through that?
People will be producing the goods that we require. So if there's a gap in the market and an opportunity, there will be people that will be taking advantage of that opportunity in the new trade deals. The supermarkets won't lose money; they will just relocate their supply lines.
So we'll eat more of what's grown here,
and we'll start to develop a taste for goods from other markets.
Bit protectionist, though, isn't it?
No, it's protectionist to the whole world. Look at South Africa. There's lots of goods there that are being produced. Rather than us giving them money to develop their economies, wouldn't it be better to give them the ability
to do the trade links? Well, listen, Darren, I think that's certainly one of the things that they're probably going to be looking at doing with the foreign aid budget. Thank you very much for your call. I want to come back to this notion that Tony Abbott put forward, that in the event we leave on WTO terms, we should deregulate. Lower tax rates. Is that the Britain you want to see?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 12 o'clock. Today's Brexit trade talks deadline is being extended again. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has just given this update in the last few moments from Brussels, following a call with Boris Johnson in the last hour.
We have accordingly mandated our negotiators to continue the talks and to see whether an agreement can be reached, even at this late stage.
The Commission's President also gave this update on the talks between the EU and the UK.
Our negotiation teams have been working day and night over the recent days, and despite the exhaustion after almost 1 year of negotiations, and despite the fact that deadlines have been missed over and over, we both think that it is responsible at this point in time to go the extra mile.
In response, Labour's Community Secretary Steve Reid is welcoming the announcement, telling Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC people in the UK cannot tolerate a no-deal outcome.
Boris Johnson needs to stick to his promise to get that deal over the line. The British economy has been putting up with 4.5 years now of incredible uncertainty. It's really difficult for businesses to invest, to plan. without that certainty. The only way this comes to an end is to get a deal done. No deal actually isn't an end point. It just means we start negotiations with Europe again from next year, but from an even weaker position.
In other headlines this hour, Germany will close most shops and schools and further limit social contacts to try to reduce coronavirus infections in the country. Chancellor Angela Merkel says she, along with the governors of 16 states, have agreed to increase lockdown measures from this Wednesday for 25 days. In recent days, Germany's daily infections and the number of related deaths have reached record highs. Separately, ministers here are being warned against easing coronavirus restrictions in England ahead of a tiered system review on Wednesday. NHS providers say any changes would risk a third wave of the virus. In response, the government says ministers will not hesitate to take necessary actions to protect local communities, adding decisions are made based on the latest available data and advice from public health experts. Reports say the Metropolitan Police have dropped their investigation into a Conservative MP accused of sexual assault. The unidentified politician has always denied the allegations after being arrested and questioned in the summer. A Virgin Galactic spacecraft has returned safely to Earth despite a rocket motor failing to launch. If the flight was successful, it could have led to the start of commercial trips being taken.
LBC weather.
With Halls, get winter ready.
Those wet and windy conditions in the west spreading eastwards through the day, reaching the far north and the east by the afternoon. Some heavy rain at times, mainly over western hills, brighter but showery conditions following into the west, a high of 12 degrees. From Global's newsroom, I'm Philip Chrysikos.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Very good afternoon to you. 3 minutes past 12 is the time. Swarbrick on Sunday here on LBC. I'm Tom Swarbrick. Hope we find you very well this Sunday afternoon, where it has been another busy one. As you heard in the last few moments, the Prime Minister is on a call with his cabinet after agreeing with the European Union that talks should continue even at this late stage. About 15 minutes or so ago, Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, came out and said this.
Good afternoon. I had a constructive and useful phone call with Prime Minister Boris Johnson. We discussed the major unsolved topics. Our negotiation teams have been working day and night over the recent days, and despite the exhaustion after almost 1 year of negotiations, and despite the fact that deadlines have been missed over and over, we both think that it is responsible at this point in time to go the extra mile. We have accordingly mandated our negotiators to continue the talks and to see whether an agreement can be reached even at this late stage. The negotiations continue here in Brussels. Thank you so much.
President of the European Commission speaking a few moments ago, interestingly not putting another deadline on when those talks have to conclude by. Come to your thoughts in just a moment. I'm joined live, though, by Bertie Ahern, the former Taoiseach of Ireland and one of the signatories of the Good Friday Agreement. Great to have you on the programme this afternoon. I wonder, first of all, your thoughts about these talks continuing. Do you think it is the responsible thing to do?
Yeah, good afternoon, Tom. I do, Tom. I've said all year that trying to shoehorn a trade deal into a calendar year was a bad decision in the first place. It was to be June, they were to finish. It was October to be finished. It was last week, it was this week. I don't think, quite frankly, I don't think it matters. It might be even a better idea if they went off for Christmas and got a good rest and came back and just extended the deadline to March or something. Because the consequences and the comprehensive nature of what they're trying to do is massive. And I think trying to when you're half exhausted, to conclude these things is not a bright idea. So I'm not one bit surprised they're extending it. And I'm delighted, as you've just said, Tom, they haven't put a deadline on it, because I don't think they should.
There's interestingly, there have been ministers in the British government saying absolutely categorically they will not extend the transition period. I wonder if you think that the British government could concede on the talks extending beyond the 31st of December.
Well, I can understand that, because they have taken a firm view on that all along, that they don't want to. But I mean, the reality is, Tom, that trade deals all over the world, and there's lots of trade deals have happened over the last 40, 50 years, and they invariably take several years. What's been attempted on this massive deal, and we're talking about, trade that goes two ways, or about 600 billion. We're not talking about something small. That, to try and look at all of the issues and to take, there's 800 pages of text, as I understand it, plus the annexes. And there are only a few small issues left. Maybe they're huge, maybe they're not. But like that kind of a comprehensive deal, to pushing it up to the very end, after all we were told that they needed 4 or 5 months to translate them, to put them forward to the Parliament. And the idea of rushing it and having the Parliament coming on a Zoom call on the last week in December, and ministers hanging around over Christmas, I really don't think it's a good idea. I think it'd be far better if they took these few issues. They are massively important. We know how complex they are. You've been talking about that non-stop, and I have too. And, I just don't see the necessity to be trying to rush them into Christmas week and half ruin Christmas for people. I don't. Now, others might say, "Oh, it's a good time when people aren't looking at the detail. We'll push it through." But that's never a good solution. My long experience in negotiations and all kinds of negotiations all my life is that trying to wrap things up in a hurry is a recipe for bad mistakes.
And in the context of all those negotiations you have done and the importance of them, the absolute centrality of some of them, how important actually are these trade talks, do you think, between the UK and the EU to get any sort of start of a trade deal?
Yeah, they're massive, Tom. I wish the UK never left Europe, but that's water under the bridge. And the reality is that the UK is an enormously important country. It's a huge economy. Its economy is directly related to the European Union. I mean, the figures speak for themselves. The exports are 45%. The imports are 52%. Nobody can change those numbers. From an Irish perspective, our economies are very interlinked in a whole lot of ways. But so it is vital to get it right. And the chaos and the disinvestment and damaging UK economy, damaging Irish economy, it's no good. The old game of saying who would be damaged most is a non-starter in my view. The reality is that without a proper, comprehensive, well-negotiated, well-understood trade deal, it's bad for everybody. Yeah. And it doesn't matter whether you're first or second in the league table, it's bad.
Well, it's certainly not, even for some of those who say it's not going to be as catastrophic as perhaps you're painting it, Mr. Ahern, they themselves say that it's not the first choice. I wonder if I could play you this, actually. We spoke a little earlier to the former Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott. And one of the things he is saying that the EU is worried about is Britain becoming much more competitive once it has left the EU, changing its arrangements to make it much more economically competitive. I wonder if you'd take a listen to some of what he advises the government could look at.
Well, the best thing to do is to have tax which is as low as possible and regulations which are as low as possible. You obviously need the strongest possible education system. You want a legal system which is as simple and as fair as possible. And of course, this is exactly what the United Kingdom has always had. It's always been the freest economy in the EU. One of the reasons why people from all over the world flock to Britain, particularly to London, is precisely because Britain has had a climate of freedom and fairness, which is so incredibly attractive to people from all walks of life, all cultures. I mean, that's why London is to this day.
So lower corporation tax, lower the top rate of tax as well, perhaps?
Well, look, I'm all in favour of lower tax, but I'm not giving, as it were, instruction to the British government. I'm saying at this time, the important thing is to get the best possible deal from Europe, failing that, to get the best possible deal from your friends and partners across the globe.
That's former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott. Bertie Ahern, I wonder whether you think that the EU does fear the UK deregulating in the fashion that Mr Abbott suggested.
Well, his country are breaking their neck trying to do a trade deal with the European Union at the moment, and they hope to wrap that up in 2021. I think what Europe is afraid of is that they will continue to give access to the UK into the single market, into the internal market, and they will give them the benefits, and then the UK will go outside it and start making competitive disadvantages for the EU. Now, I think everyone can understand that. I think you can argue about what flexibilities there should be, but I don't think there's any more to that. I think the European Union do not want to give all and lose all, and I think that's the balance, and that's why I, frankly, Tom, don't understand why it's been so difficult in the negotiations, because it should have been possible, in my view, to box in, where the flexibilities were allowed. The UK don't want to be straitjacketed into everything, and the EU don't want to give everything. And by the way, just what our Australian colleague was saying there, I think in the UK sometimes it's forgotten by a lot of commentators that it was Margaret Thatcher, a great free marketeer, that did so much to create the single market and did so much to drive the EU economies together, obviously for the interests of the UK, but also for the interests of the EU. And there probably never would have been a single market to the way that we have it today, only for Margaret Thatcher.
And yet some of the changes that Mr Abbott was indicating the UK government might like to make, things about corporation tax, as I understand it, and put me right, Mr Ahern, but Ireland has already done that in terms of its corporation tax rate, and it has done it whilst being a member of the European Union. And I'm still not 100% clear about what it is the British government could actually do to make the UK much, much more competitive once outside the European Union and on WTO terms.
Yeah, well, I was the finance minister back almost 30 years ago that brought in those low taxes, and it did an awful lot to help foreign direct investment in Ireland. It doesn't solve everything, but it certainly brought in a huge amount of international capital. And I think from the UK's point of view, WTO terms to me, and again, I don't want to give any lectures to anybody, but I think WTO trade terms are bad terms for the UK. I can't see how WTO, like, if you see how it would damage your fantastic car industry. Look, London is a great financial services city, but without the passports that allow the EU can give to London, it won't wreck London, but it will damage the financial services. So I think, Matter, you can argue all day, as people are doing, about where the pluses and minuses are, but the reality is that this is the hard reality, that without a proper trade deal, without proper relationships, this is bad for the UK, it's bad for the EU, and they can debate for the next 6 months who was worse, but there's no winners in this, and that's why I think getting an understanding on the level playing field, and getting an agreement that both of them can live with, if not perfect, is the right thing to do. And if that takes another week or month or 2 months, I think that's the right negotiating position to do. Walking away from this is a mistake. As the Prime Minister himself said, it would be a mistake of statecraft, but I think it would be a mistake for everybody.
Terrific to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme this afternoon. Bertie Ahern, the former Irish Taoiseach and one of the signatories of the Good Friday Agreement on Swarbrick on Sunday here on LBC. 0345 6060 973 is my number. The suggestion from a Number 10 official quoted in one of the papers this afternoon is that they, the EU, are being so adamant about the need for us to stay fixed in their orbit, shackled by the rules, that it must mean they fear the UK becoming a nimble, low-tax, low-regulation, Singapore-style economy on their doorstep, one which would be far more attractive to business. Do you see that as the future for Britain once outside of the European Union? Do you welcome that future for Britain outside the European Union? 0345 6060 973. Tom Swarbrick on LBC, it's 12:16.
LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
12:20 is the time. Very good afternoon to you. Swarbrick on Sunday. Tom Swarbrick here. Loads of you want to get on the radio this afternoon, so let's come straight to your calls. Here's Adrian in Swindon. Hi there, Adrian.
Oh, hi, Tom. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, sir.
Hiya. Thanks for having me. I was listening to some of your callers this morning, and I've actually made a list of some of the statements that they've been saying against the EU. And I was thinking, what if those same statements were made during the time of the referendum? So here they go. So they would have sounded something like, EU will not want us to become competitive. EU will not give us unfettered access to their market. EU will want to keep us tied to their rules in exchange for market access. EU will play hardball. EU will make unrealistic demands. EU will want Brexit to be more difficult than it should. EU will want to make UK's life difficult. And it sounds a lot to me like those statements. So they sound like the EU somehow has power over the UK. Which leads me to the final conclusion. Are you ready for it?
I think I can go on then, Adrian. Yeah, but go on.
Brexiteers are not going to like this one. We need them more than they need us. Otherwise, how can you explain all of these statements that they're making now and why the EU is playing hardball?
Well, see, now I can see entirely how you come to that conclusion, Adrian. However, I think that conclusion is undermined by whatever it is the government of the day or of the future decides to do with the UK economy to make it more competitive. Why is it that the EU wants to shackle us or wants to keep us in its orbit or wants to play hardball? It's because the UK could do things that make it very, very competitive and take away from EU businesses. One of them may well be deregulation on various workers' rights or environmental standards or something, even though the UK government has said it absolutely will not. Low tax, low regulation, Singapore-style economy. Isn't that the thing that the EU is afraid of?
Well, yes. And what's the problem with that? Because they just want to protect their own market.
Of course.
So why wasn't this thing mentioned before? Don't you think that would have swayed some minds initially? Don't you think
what
some
thing
people
was mentioned
think it would have, in the referendum, I mean? Why wasn't this position made clear in the referendum?
The position of being a low-tax, low-regulation Singapore-style economy?
Yes.
Do you think that would have put people off voting for Brexit?
Of course. I mean, you look at, workplace rules and stuff like that and standards. What do you think people will say? Oh, yes, I do want lower standards. I do want to have fewer protections.
No, but again, you're absolutely right. And it's worth saying that the government have said repeatedly that they're not going to deregulate on workers' rights or environmental standards.
But they're saying it now.
Isn't the point that if any government, regardless of its colour or shape or size, if any government were to do something that the majority of British people didn't like or didn't want, then they're answerable to those people at the ballot box?
Yes, they are. I'm not saying that they aren't. My point is only this, is that all of this started from a misleading set of statements that have turned out to be untrue. That is my only
Well, listen,
point.
Adrian, I think that is a path well trodden, and rightly so. That there are definitely, and we've talked about them even this morning. I mean, whether it's from the Prime Minister to various columnists, people started out by saying, of course, we don't need to leave the single market, and we're now 4 years later at the point where Christmas is coming, at the end of the transition period, and businesses still do not have a Scooby-Doo what's coming next. Adrian, thank you. Matt's in Cambridge. Hi there, Matt.
Hi, Tom. The time for debating and arguing is over. It's now time for consequences. So I'm going to give you an unforgettable image about what lies ahead. Hard no-deal Brexit is like separating Siamese twins with a machete and hoping the weaker one survives.
Right. Now unpack that for us. Now that we have that sort of wonderful Sunday lunchtime image in our minds, unpack that, Matt, into how it translates to the reality of it.
Let me come to this from a different angle. It's begun buzzing around again that Boris Johnson thinks that no-deal Brexit is just another Y2K. It's not. No more than COVID is just another flu. I can tell you that because I was actually involved in Y2K just over 20 years ago. I also have the unique privilege of having studied law under some of the nation's finest legal minds. Y2K was about 3 lines of code and 1 field in a database. Brexit is about 45 years of legislation, treaties and protocols and every single industry in the nation. You can fix and test code. You can wind the clock on your computer forward. Yeah. You can't do any of those things with Brexit. So my view is that if Brexit has to happen, I was actually initially quite dispassionate about Brexit, but I'm now leaning Remain because of how it's unfolded, is if you're going to do Brexit, you need to do it carefully. You need to do it slowly. It needs to take time. You need to recognise that 45 years of legislation will take 10 to 20 years to unpick, law by law,
what we're seeing,
treaty by treaty,
Matt, what we're
regulation by regulation.
And listen, sorry to cut across you, but what we're seeing is the flip, I think, of perhaps where Theresa May's government was on this, which was we'll start close, we'll start aligned, we'll start with a common rule book, and then UK governments over the years, should they wish, if there's the political will, if there's the popular will, start to diverge on a variety of different things. And that will, of course, change access to that particular market and have consequences therein. And what we've got now is, I think, or could well be a point of a UK government saying, well, we'll start really far out and then we'll negotiate into the bits that we like or the bits that we want, and that may well have consequences as well for the market. I think that is the the ideological flip that has perhaps happened. Now, I was all for the first one. I was all for doing it carefully and sensibly and slowly, on the understanding that the Brexiteers won. Leavers won. We're leaving. Let's leave in an orderly and careful way. But I have to say, until this time last year, actually, there was no indication that the Leavers had actually won, and because people were talking about Remain, they were talking about a second referendum, they wanted to stay in, and I think that has played a big part in how we've ended up here.
That's right. And if you look into the core of conservatism itself, conservatism is about being careful and gradual and methodical. What faces us now is blowing everything up and hoping for the best. There is nothing conservative about any of what this Conservative government is trying to do. It's verging on anarchy.
Okay. Well, let's see. I mean, at the moment, we've still got the talks continuing, but interesting that no deadline has been set for when they should finish, although the big deadline is the legal one is the 31st of December, and the British government have been implacably opposed thus far to extending it. But you never know with this one. Matt, thank you. Tim's in Leatherhead. Tim.
Morning, Tom.
Sir.
Where to start? I started listening to your show this morning and rang in earlier with an idea, but it's changed 5 times in the time I've been waiting to speak to you. Adrian summed it up best of all, I think, in that the situation we are in now is absolutely and precisely because the things that were promised 4.5 years ago were mutually exclusive. They weren't possible. You couldn't stay you couldn't leave the single market and expect to have the same access with none of the issues. They don't need us more than we need them. That was Adrian's point exactly. But my main concern is that over the last week or so, people, and I'm sorry to say this, but people like yourself and Majid Nawaz, who were Remainers, and I fully understand you saying it was a democratic decision we now need to get on board. And I'm trying to do the same. I run a small business, but my goodness me, the problems this is throwing up are just unbelievable. Yeah. And I fully understand you wanting to now be open, but I do feel very strongly that you and Majid are now allowing untruths and slogans that were peddled out 4 years ago that at the time you guys would have picked up and countered. You're now allowing them to go through unchallenged. And you're actually talking yourselves this morning about us being shackled
Tim, give me an example.
EU. Well,
yes, I used that. I used Tim. I used that as a quote. It is actually in the quote from the number 10 official that is in the Mail on Sunday. They are becoming so adamant about the need for us to stay. Hang on a sec. Let me read it. They're being so adamant about the need for us to stay fixed in their orbit, shackled by their rules, that it must mean they fear the UK becoming a nimble, low tax, low regulation Singapore-style economy on their doorstep.
Which is precisely the reason why Tony Abbott is talking nonsense when he says we should get the same deal as Canada. Because the difference between Canada and the UK is that we're only 20 minutes down a tunnel away from the market, and Canada's a long, long way away. But, you know, I'm not
and geography is clearly important. Geography is clearly important. But having gone from the EU, having gone from saying, well, you can have a Canada-style arrangement if you wish, to now being in a position where they have resiled from offering that again, that points to a negotiating failure of the European Union, doesn't it? Or have they got this? They got this spot on.
I tried to buy a car last week or 2 weeks ago, and he made me a really good offer, and I turned it down. I went back last week and I said I'd like that deal from last week. He said, "I'm sorry, it's not available anymore." It is exactly the same.
Well, the thing that's changed. Hang on a sec, Tim.
Can I just answer the point about you allowing things to go through, and even by implication, the fact that we are told that we will be able to do things in the future that we can't do currently is not true. I already export to Africa. I've already exported to South America. I've been doing it for 11 years whilst we've been part of the EU. Absolutely no problem. The problem I'm now going to have with a no-deal Brexit is I won't be able to get my containers out of Felixstowe docks because they're going to be jammed up with red tape and paperwork.
Mm-hmm. Well, but Tim, there is none of that has passed us by. And in fact, the question that I'm still seeking an answer to is, and the British government have been very quiet I think perhaps even purposefully so, in not detailing what it is they want to do with the so-called newfound freedom they would get by coming out on WTO terms.
Because there are no newfound freedoms. There are only regulations and restrictions. There are tariffs. They can't tell us what they're going to do with them because there aren't any, and there never were any, and there are never going to be any. And this is back to my point that the entire thing is built on a pack of lies that you and one or two others defended and countered really, really well and effectively throughout the referendum. But now we've all rolled over and said, well, OK, we've lost, let's get on with it. The Brexiters didn't give up 45 years ago.
No, but Tim, I'm sorry, I don't really accept, and I don't really accept that a legal constitutional democratic decision made by an overwhelming number of people in this country counts as rolling over and going, OK, then. It is...
No, sorry, that's you and Mudgett are saying things like that. You're saying, let's respect the democratic decision. It doesn't change the fact that the democratic decision was
well, it's a democratic decision, Tim, that I don't agree with. It's a democratic decision that I didn't vote for. It's one that I don't agree with. The way in which it has been handled, certainly over the last year and a half, has been, from my own point of view, in my own opinion, pretty catastrophic. Because it has got to the position where large numbers of people who previously said one thing about the Brexit they wanted are now having to do a flip reverse because reality is dawning. So I'm fully on board with that. But I don't want to go back to old arguments about the referendum result itself. But democracy itself is eroded and unfortunately could be eradicated to a certain degree if you start saying that legitimate decisions made by a majority of the British people therefore should not be carried out because I don't like it and I don't like the way it was conducted. I think that is massively dangerous.
Tom, can I come back to that comment itself? It wasn't a majority of the British people. It was a
majority of the people who voted.
Exactly, which was actually of the British people 28%. It was 38%.
Well, then more people should have gone out to vote. More people should be registered to vote. I don't think you can start arguing about, people should vote. There's an idea. If you want to have a say and if you want to have a complaint, vote. Tim, thank you. 0345 6060 973. Many more of your calls to come. Let's get some news headlines first at 12:33. Here's Tim Humphrey.
Brexit talks are going to continue beyond tonight's deadline. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says she and Boris Johnson have decided it's worth going the extra mile to get a trade agreement. The Labour Party's issued a statement saying the government needs to deliver on its promise to get a deal and allow us to move on as a country. Keir Starmer will be answering your calls with Nick Ferrari on LBC tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. NHS Providers is warning against coronavirus restrictions being eased in England. It says there could be a third wave if regions are moved down in the tier system when they're reviewed later this week. The weather, wet and windy weather spreading eastwards with brighter showery conditions following on behind, a high of 13.
This is LBC. This is LBC Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster.
Here's Margaret in Dulwich on 84850 this afternoon. It's all been decided, Tom. This is just confected drama to keep the peasants entertained, particularly the media peasants, says Margaret. Here's Marcel. If the EU do not trust Britain, let us go. If they do trust us, give us the oven-ready Canadian deal, which Ramonas need to remember the EU had already offered us, says Marcel. Yes, but as callers have suggested, the terms changed after the UK had said no to that particular deal because it would have put a trade barrier in the Irish Sea. And Boris Johnson agreed to a trade barrier in the Irish Sea. John's in Croydon. Hi there, John.
Good morning. No, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, there's been so many different sort of distorted things being put forward as far as taxes, etc., are concerned. I mean, as far as I understand, the only country in the world that presently works on purely on WTO rules is North Korea. Yeah? Well, everybody else has got some sort of trade deals, etc.
Well, we do have other trade deals with other nations as well, and some of these have been rolled over, but they're incredibly small compared to an EU-sized one.
Yes, absolutely. Also, this thing about we'll be able to set our own corporation tax, etc. I mean. When you look at the fact that Hungary has a corporation tax of 34.4%, Hungary has a 9% corporation tax. France has a 34.4% corporation tax. So we can already do that within limits.
Well, John, this is, and I'll be honest with you, this is where I'm quite happy to display my ignorance once again. I don't understand what it is that we are now seeking to do, or the British government is seeking to do, to make Britain massively more competitive, that either it couldn't do whilst in the European Union, or is about to do to make sure that we can, find a lot of direct foreign investment in the country. What is it that we're going to do in the sunlit uplands? I'm not sure.
I've no idea. I'm sorry. I'm with you. I've no idea what we're supposed to be doing in these so-called sunlit uplands. I mean, you had the failed former Prime Minister of Australia on a little while ago telling us how wonderful it was all going to be. But had another not so failed Prime Minister of Australia earlier saying that, it's going to be horrible. And I'm afraid I'm on the same line as that. I don't think that we, and what are they talking about? That's the other thing. They say we're going to extend talks. Yeah. I mean, what are they physically actually talking about?
Well, John,
this is sitting there and going blah blah.
Yeah, you are, if I may say, you are asking the exactly the same questions that I would love to be asking the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab right now, but unfortunately he's on the phone with the Prime Minister and can't be with us. So I agree. And this is, to be fair, thank you, John. By the way, this is a completely open question. If pile in if you want, what is it that you want to see Britain do once out of the European Union to make itself far more competitive, far more exciting place to invest, that Tony Abbott and many millions of others believes is the future for this country, and that we need not fear? Al's in Hackney. Hi, Al.
Hi, Tom.
Hi.
I just want to make a few points about this Brexit and the lies that people keep talking about. Well, I think we need to remember in 1972, I wasn't born then, Edward Heath and his cronies took us into all this quagmire on the back of lies. John Major, I think it was 99 with the Maastricht Treaty.
Sorry. I just step in there because I can hear people being ready to throw the radio out their cars. If they can rip them out the car, don't they? This quagmire was not the quagmire that Edward Heath took us into in 1972 because it wasn't around
it was different back then. Yeah, it was different. But the point is what I want to say to Boris Johnson. I voted for Brexit and I voted Boris Johnson. I'm not a Conservative voter. I'm going to give my vote to Boris Johnson. If he can walk away with a no deal now, he needs to walk away with a no deal, because a few calls down back, there's a guy called Matt, he said he worked in as a lawyer and it took 20 years or something for it all to come together. If they come back with a deal now at the last minute, the successive governments are going to have issues with trying to get out then. So we're going to remain in, and it's time to get out now. This is our opportunity.
What? I'm sorry, but what are you talking about? We're out. We're out of the European Union. We have agreed to. Sorry. I'm gonna. Let me say this, and I promise you can come back, Al, because I know how people hate it if I speak over them. I promise you can come back in. Just as a point of clarity here, we've left the European Union. We did so last year. We've organised and negotiated a transition period that we are now in. The trade deal would tie us to potentially various rules in order to have access to the market that we want to be able to have access to. Those rules would be agreed by the British government and the British Parliament, which have been and remain sovereign.
Yeah, but they don't want us to have that deal. They want to give us a hard time to make it.
Who's they?
The European von der Leyen's people, they want to set an example with Britain that, if you leave, this is what's going to happen to you guys. And that's it. It's just dirty politics at play. We can be a great island. The greatness can be put back into the United Kingdom of Great Britain. And Boris Johnson, I have faith in him, can do it. I'm telling you, he needs to just walk away with a no deal and get out. We will survive. We will not sink.
I understand that, Al. And I think maybe, if the British government have said that it's not going to extend the deadline for the transition period, then and talks keep going on until that point, then at some stage they are just going to have to say, okay, thanks very much. But what I really want to understand is, you say that the great can be put back into Britain. Boris Johnson can do it. We can do all that. What is the that you want? What is the that you think Boris Johnson can do?
My background is in finance, and there's lots of billions of pounds waiting to enter the United Kingdom in January, and that's fact. And I'm not here to, there's money to be poured into this country on the back of Brexit, but most people, the lay people, they don't know this.
This is the pent-up foreign investment, of which I think you're right. There is some pent-up foreign investment, not least because Britain has been a basket of uncertainty for the last 4 years. So I understand that point, that because of the uncertainty, people have been slightly more reticent to invest. Once there is certainty, whichever way, then there is a blockage that can be unblocked and more money can come in. But specifically on changes to regulations or tax or whatever, what is the thing that you think, with your background in finance, Al, that Boris Johnson should do once we've left the European Union to make us more competitive?
I'm not a politician or a negotiator, right? I'm just a financial person, and we look at finance and we make returns on finance. All Boris Johnson needs to do is tell von der Leyen and her team, we're out of here, we don't want a deal, and then do WTO. The Europeans will come back with some sort of a deal. They're going to lose out.
What is the thing we do? Sorry, but I'm going to push one more time on this. What is the thing you want, other than the European Union to come back and say, please, we're begging bowls out now?
No.
Other than that, what is it that you think, what is it that you're looking forward to the British government doing once we've left the European Union, once we're out on WTO terms, that it couldn't do previously?
To be independent, as Liz Truss is doing, sorting out deals with other countries, and there's still limitations, but they're doing good. They're doing very good. And believe me, January, there are going to be hard times. I'm not saying it's going to be plain sailing. It's going to be difficult, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 months, but we're going to come out on top. Guaranteed, we're going to come out on top. Boris Johnson needs to come out without a deal. We don't need a deal. We don't need to stay in. Not one little iota.
We're not in. So we come out with no ties whatsoever, which would be WTO terms and nothing to do with freight arrangements that the European Union are trying to set up, as well as the UK trying to set up to try and get those haulage companies in and out of the country as smoothly as possible. Still didn't hear it. Al, listen, no, I'm grateful to you. You've had a good go at it, and I've enjoyed your call. But I don't know whether it's just me, but I'm not hearing what it is people want to see the British government do once in the basking in the warmth of the sunlit uplands. What is it that you want to see changed to give us a competitive edge that can make the country even better than it is already? 0345 6060 973 1246.
Coming up at 1 on LBC, Majid Nawaz.
Prime Minister Johnson and Ursula von der Leyen have announced that they have agreed to continue and extend Brexit talks. What do you think that means? Are we near to a deal, or do you still think there'll be no deal?
Majid Nawaz on LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster on LBC.
John's in Salford this afternoon. Hi there, John.
Hey, Ben. I kind of wanted to talk originally about the manifesto, the Conservative manifesto, and they were saying how they had a commitment to get a good deal, Brexit, rather than a no-deal Brexit. I kind of, your question has actually got me thinking more about, what I'd want to see in a post-EU thing. Yeah. So, I reckon the UK could do a really good job of focusing on green energy and environmental stuff and build up a really good industry from that, because we basically did a lot of the damage with the Industrial Revolution in the first place.
And I think Boris Johnson is bang on that. I think some of the commitments he's made are genuinely world-leading.
Yeah. There's one thing I was thinking, the level playing field thing. Can you help me out? Does that go both ways? Like, if the EU raise their standards, we would face tariffs if we don't match them. But if we raise our standards and, look at better environmental policies and stuff like that, does that then affect them as well? Would we end up...
I have to say, John, again, this is one of the things I wasn't necessarily 100% clear on, because the position of Ursula von der Leyen, at least, is that the EU is not offering a deal whereby the UK would have to run concurrent high standards with the EU even after Brexit and once we're out, to the point where if we don't follow those rules, we're immediately slapped with tariffs. She's saying that's not what's being offered. The UK government is saying that is precisely what's being offered, because the EU wants to keep us in as close a regulatory orbit as possible.
Well, it kind of makes sense that you don't want us to come in and undercut with, because if we don't have to adhere to the same standards...
but the undercutting is arguably, we're told, what it is the EU fears Britain could do, because that would make Britain much more competitive possibly than European businesses, and therefore attract greater investment and more money, and it all goes gangbusters. But what I haven't heard yet is, well, what is it that we could do? What are the specific areas? Because I think there might be quite a few people, perhaps more people than are willing to admit at this stage, who, if they had a coherent, concrete vision of what we could do when we're out of it and how it could benefit the whole country, might be able to suffer 3 or 4 months of difficulties at the border with getting veg in, if there was a vision and a possibility of doing something genuinely incredible for the people of this country. But at the moment, nothing's been forthcoming.
What I'm wondering is, if we took that deal and we had the level playing field thing, if we were to raise our standards on environmental policies and worker rights and stuff like that, would the EU then have to match that? Mm-hmm. Like, could we, as a small island nation, making our own rules with much less bureaucracy, be able to impact the entire continent? And
in theory, yes. In theory, yes, but then you take I think then you'd probably have to take a sort of financial economic calculation about whether it's in your interests, once you've got higher standards, to slap tariffs on the European Union if they don't meet those standards, and whether you could waive it, or whether you could stomach it, or whether you would put those tariffs on. But ultimately, it's a decision for the British government to make, and that is the position that it's going to find itself in once it comes out from the European Union anyway. John, thank you. Evan's in Slough. Hi, Evan.
Hi, Tom. I agree. If we made a product with higher standards, we would definitely insist upon more tariffs to keep a level playing field with the EU. But I think the idea that the UK is going to deregulate, form a tax haven, reduce labour rights, open up borders, and reduce standards, cut the welfare state, that would all definitely make the UK much more competitive, and it would definitely threaten the EU, because it would threaten the rights of the people of the EU. But I really doubt the British public want that. I just don't see that happening. I think people in Britain think like Europeans. We want to manufacture high-quality goods, we want automation, we want high productivity, and we want high wages. And that's where the world is going in the next few decades. We don't want to race to the bottom. So I just don't see that there's an issue. We want to trade with developed countries like the EU, and we want to trade with as few barriers and as few costs as possible.
Evan, I agree. I think actually there is as much as the economic consequences of deregulating and lowering tax might be, might be possibly brilliant. I think the politics around it, where people are right now, given actually what we've lived through over the past year with the coronavirus stuff, people aren't there yet, I don't think.
basically, a lot of multinational companies avoid tax at the moment. I mean, the greater issue is how do we make sure we capture the taxes, prevent countries playing each other, multinationals playing countries off against each other. And that's where the EU can do that. It can step in and help make multinationals pay by the rules, pay the taxes that they are due. So I think if anything, the EU has a role to play in that. Breaking up or separating countries is not the way forward. I mean, to understand the way the EU think, where they think of 27 separate countries with borders, tariffs, quotas and standards, each trying to sell to each other, that would be incredibly expensive. It's not practical. We sell to one large market, and that's where we're way ahead in that respect.
Okay. Evan, appreciate it. Thank you. Ellerman's in Dartford. Hi, Ellerman.
Yeah, how you doing? I wanted to talk. Tony Abbott was spot on when he said we need to deregulate and also reduce taxation.
Okay. Where?
Hello? I'll give you some examples about how the UK can increase its productivity levels by reducing taxation. In the UK, yes, we do have a corporation tax rate of 19%, which is clearly below the OECD average. But one of the areas in the corporation tax system where we lack in is capital allowances, the amount of money businesses can deduct to invest in machinery and buildings. And so after Brexit, we could increase that to encourage businesses to invest more in machinery and buildings and increase productivity levels.
Could we not do that anyway? I mean, corporation tax was going to be cut further to 17% by Boris Johnson, and then he decided not to.
Yeah, that's true. We could do that at the moment, but
it doesn't take a WTO Brexit to be able to look at cutting.
I'll give you an example. Okay, you see the EU. The minimum VAT rate in the EU is 15%. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Hello?
Yes, Ellerman, take it for granted that you're on.
Okay, the minimum VAT rate in the EU is 15%. For example, once we leave the EU without a no-deal Brexit, we could, for example, lower the VAT rate to 7% and have a flat rate VAT rate like they do in New Zealand.
Ellerman, I'm really sorry to cut across you, but I'm going to have to do it for the Prime Minister because Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been speaking in the last few moments following his call with Ursula von der Leyen and following a discussion with his cabinet ministers. Let's take a listen to what the Prime Minister has had to say.
Well, I've just talked to Ursula von der Leyen and updated the cabinet about the contents of the call. And the idea was that when we went out on Wednesday, the hope was that we were going to be able to finish things off on today if there was a deal to be done. As things stand, and this was basically what Ursula and I agreed, I'm afraid we're still very far apart on some key things, but where there's life, there's hope. We're going to keep talking to see what we can do. The UK certainly won't be walking away from the talks. I think people would expect us to go the extra mile. I repeated my offer, which is, if it's necessary to talk to other capitals, and I'm very happy to do that. The Commission very determined to keep keep the negotiations on the way that they've been done between us and the Commission. That's fine. But I've got to repeat, the most likely thing now is, of course, that we have to get ready for WTO terms, Australia terms. And don't forget, everybody, we've made huge preparations for this. We've now been at this for 4.5 years. Sam, there's a long time, perhaps more intensively in the last couple of years than previously. But anyway, we've got ready. And anybody who needs to know what to do, get on to gov.uk/transition, see what needs to be done, and get ready for January the 1st.
The Prime Minister speaking in the last few moments after calls with Ursula von der Leyen and his cabinet saying that it won't be the UK that walks away from those talks. I'm done for this weekend. Thank you very much indeed for all your time, your calls, your texts, your tweets. I'm back on Monday night at 10 p.m. and Swarbrick on Sunday is at 10 a.m. next Sunday morning. The Global Player is there for all your needs. It is totally free. Get downloading. Ian Payne is with you at 4 right now. Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Tom. Right. We are going to do a Brexit special. So what we will do is that Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, and Ursula von der Leyen, who is the European Commission President, have announced that they are going to go the extra mile to try and seek a Brexit deal. That may even imply, and we don't know, but it may even imply extending the deadline because we were expecting an announcement today. If they don't announce a deal or no deal, and instead extend the deadline, then of course this situation continues. Either way, we'll be asking you what you think that means, going the extra mile. Are they about to clinch a deal, or will we still end up with no deal? And if we end up with no deal, what do you think of that? Are you prepared? It's all coming up here next on LBC with Majid Nawaz.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 1 o'clock, talks are going to continue in Brussels over a post-Brexit trade deal between the EU and the UK. Boris Johnson